The door chimed as Marcus King walked into the brightly lit store, casually dressed in a black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. His eyes scanned the familiar surroundings of his own business, but there was something different about today. Today, he wasn't the CEO. Today, he was just another customer, blending in, unnoticed. Marcus had seen the store plenty of times, but never like this. It was one thing to oversee operations from the comfort of his office or boardroom, but it was something else entirely to experience it from the ground level. He had decided to go undercover, to understand what his employees faced on a daily basis, and to see how his vision for the company was being carried out. But as he walked deeper into the store, he immediately felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The employees seemed busy, focusing on tasks, chatting amongst themselves, but no one greeted him. No one even looked in his direction. It was as if he didn't even exist. It wasn't until he reached the checkout counter that the tension hit him like a wave. "Excuse me," Marcus said, trying to catch the attention of the employee behind the counter, a young man with a scruffy beard and an unenthusiastic demeanor. He tried to keep his tone friendly, not wanting to give away the reason for his visit just yet. The employee glanced up at him briefly, then back down at the register without acknowledging his presence. Marcus waited for a moment, expecting the usual small talk, something along the lines of, "How's your day going?" or "Can I help you find something?" But instead, the young man merely sighed, as if irritated by Marcus' interruption. "Can I help you with something? Or are you just standing there?" the employee muttered, clearly uninterested in offering any assistance. His tone was dismissive, and his eyes barely lifted from the register. Marcus blinked, taken aback by the attitude. He was used to being treated with respect. Hell, he had earned it. But here, in his own store, this guy just refused to acknowledge him. "Actually," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm, "I'm trying to find a few things. Could you help me out?" The employee gave a half shrug, still not looking him in the eye. "I'm kind of busy," he said, his words dripping with impatience. "You can look around." There was a long pause as Marcus processed what had just happened. This wasn't just about a rude employee. This was something deeper. How could an employee in his own store have the audacity to treat any customer, let alone a potential regular, this way? As if sensing the sudden tension, a colleague of the young man behind the counter glanced over and shot Marcus an apologetic look, but no one came to his rescue. The damage had already been done. Marcus' thoughts raced. Was this a one-off? A bad day for the employee? Or was this the reflection of a larger issue? One thing was certain. This wasn't the kind of behavior he wanted to foster in his company. But what really hit him wasn't just the refusal. It was the complete disregard for the company he had worked so hard to build. It was a stark reminder that even with all the success he had achieved, things weren't perfect. There was something missing in the way the company operated, something that had allowed this type of attitude to grow unchecked. He forced a smile, deciding to leave the counter and continue his tour of the store. But deep down, he knew he wasn't going to leave it at that. He was going to get to the bottom of this. Before heading out, Marcus glanced at the camera above the counter, something he had installed for security purposes. It was as if the camera was watching him, but he was watching it right back. He could feel the weight of his own decision now. Was this how things were really going? Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to check it. This was bigger than just one encounter. Marcus had a lot to think about. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Marcus King wasn't born into privilege. He wasn't a silver spoon kid whose path to success was paved for him. His story was one of grit, struggle, and an unwavering belief that he could change the narrative of his life. Growing up in a rough neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta, Marcus learned early on that the world didn't hand you anything. If you wanted to make something of yourself, you had to fight for it. His mother, a hardworking single mom, was his first teacher. She instilled in him the values of perseverance and discipline, making sure that no matter what obstacles life threw at him, he wouldn't back down. "The world may try to knock you down, Marcus," she would tell him late at night as they sat at the kitchen table, "but you rise every time." Marcus never forgot those words. They became the foundation of everything he would go on to achieve. But that didn't make the journey any easier. His first taste of true hardship came when he was 12 years old. That was when his mother fell seriously ill, and medical bills piled up faster than they could keep up. It felt like the weight of the world was on their shoulders. The local hospital wasn't going to wait for payments, and there were days when Marcus had to make the tough decision between getting food on the table and paying for her treatments. That was when he first understood the devastating reality of living paycheck to paycheck. To help out, he got his first job at a local convenience store. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught him something invaluable: how to work hard, how to connect with people from all walks of life, and how to overcome adversity with a smile on his face. Those small moments of customer service, the hours spent cleaning the back room, and the late-night shifts became the early lessons that shaped his business mindset. But it was more than just hard work. Marcus was a natural problem solver. While working at the store, he began to notice inefficiencies. Employees were undertrained, customers weren't being treated well, and the store itself was barely staying afloat. His drive to fix problems led him to a passion for business, and after high school, Marcus decided to pursue a degree in business management. College wasn't easy either. He had to take on multiple part-time jobs to cover tuition and living expenses. But it was there that Marcus met his first mentor, an older professor who saw potential in him. This professor became more than just a teacher. He was a guide, someone who showed Marcus how to think critically about business, leadership, and what it took to turn a dream into reality. It wasn't long before Marcus realized that the corporate world was where he belonged. After graduating with honors, he moved to New York City, determined to make his mark. He started at the bottom, working for a mid-level company in retail management. The pay was low, the hours were long, but Marcus was relentless. He paid attention to every detail, learned from every failure, and climbed his way up the ladder. It was during these early years that Marcus developed his philosophy of leadership. He believed that a great company wasn't just about profits, it was about creating a culture of respect, trust, and empowerment. People needed to feel valued, and when that happened, the work would follow. It wasn't just about making money. It was about building something lasting, something that changed lives. By the time he was 35, Marcus had taken his career to the next level. He had built a successful chain of retail stores that was quickly becoming a household name. His brand was known for high-quality products, exceptional customer service, and an inclusive work environment where every employee felt heard and respected. But with all the success came challenges. The higher Marcus climbed, the more he felt detached from the everyday experiences of his employees. He spent less time in stores and more time in boardrooms and meetings, handling the larger issues of business strategy and expansion. That's when the idea for going undercover began to form. Marcus knew that, no matter how much he tried to stay connected with his employees, he could never truly understand their struggles unless he experienced them firsthand. It was this realization that led him to take the bold step of visiting his own stores undercover. He needed to see things with fresh eyes, to truly grasp the challenges his team faced and the way his company was being run on the ground level. What he didn't expect, however, was to encounter the kind of attitude he saw today, the one that came from Jake, the employee who had refused to help him. In that moment, Marcus realized that the journey he had ahead of him wasn't just about understanding his employees. It was about a much bigger shift in how he led. The road wasn't going to be easy, but Marcus was determined. If he wanted to change the company, he had to start by changing how he saw it and how his employees saw him. Marcus sat alone in his office that evening, the glow from his laptop screen illuminating the otherwise dim room. The sound of his fingers typing was the only thing breaking the silence. He stared at the blinking cursor on his screen, deep in thought. The day had been a whirlwind, filled with board meetings, phone calls, and decisions that seemed to carry the weight of an entire company. But nothing had stuck with him more than the interaction at the store. The refusal, the lack of respect. It gnawed at him, and he knew he couldn't just let it go. This wasn't just about one rude employee. It was a reflection of something bigger, something deeper. For the past few years, Marcus had worked tirelessly to build his brand. He'd poured his heart into making his retail business a success. But now, sitting at his desk, he realized something. He had lost touch. Somewhere along the way, he had become too distant from the reality of his employees' everyday lives. He had become so wrapped up in meetings and financials that he had forgotten what it was like to be on the front lines. That's when the idea struck him. An idea that, at first, seemed outrageous but, in retrospect, felt like the only logical solution. He would go undercover. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. It had been brewing for some time. Over the last year, Marcus had noticed subtle changes in the company. Morale seemed to be dipping, complaints were starting to trickle in from all corners of the business, and he wasn't always sure of the pulse of his stores. He could read the numbers, but he couldn't feel the day-to-day experience of the people who worked for him. The thought of disguising himself and walking through his own store as a regular customer was both thrilling and terrifying. But Marcus had always thrived on pushing boundaries. If he wanted to fix the issues at his company, he had to go to the heart of it all, the employees. He needed to see what they were really going through, hear their unfiltered opinions, and find out if they were truly aligned with the vision he had for the company. He wasn't just going to do this for a day or two. He needed to immerse himself in the process, work alongside the employees, experience their struggles, and see how they really interacted with customers. He would be a fly on the wall, watching and learning. And if he wanted to make lasting changes, he couldn't let anyone know who he really was, not even the managers. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the wheels of his mind turning. He had no idea what he would discover, but that was part of the challenge. He knew there would be things he didn't want to see, but he also knew it would be the only way to make things better. He could already picture it, dressing down, blending in with the other customers, walking through the aisles as if he was just another shopper. He could feel the excitement building inside him. This wasn't just an undercover operation. This was a chance to reset, to get back to the roots of his business. "All right," Marcus muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. "Let's see what's really going on." The next day, Marcus made the call to his assistant, Sarah, a reliable and meticulous woman who had been with him since the early days of the company. "Sarah," he said, trying to keep his voice casual, "I need you to clear my schedule for the next couple of days. No meetings, no calls. I'm going to be on the ground." Sarah paused on the other end of the line. "On the ground?" she repeated, curiosity in her voice. "Yeah, I'm going to be visiting a few stores, but in a different way. I need to experience things firsthand. I'll be in touch." "Understood, Marcus. I'll handle everything here," Sarah replied, though Marcus could sense the concern in her tone. She always knew when something was up, but Marcus didn't explain further. This was something he had to do on his own. He couldn't afford to have anyone, especially Sarah, know what he was planning. Not yet, anyway. The next morning, Marcus stood in front of his closet, staring at his clothes. He needed to blend in. Nothing flashy, nothing that would give him away. He pulled on a simple hoodie, a pair of jeans, and sneakers, choosing clothes that felt comfortable yet nondescript. His reflection in the mirror wasn't the polished, sharp-dressed CEO he was used to seeing. Instead, he looked like just another guy. Someone you might pass on the street without a second thought. That was the point. He wasn't Marcus King, CEO of a multimillion-dollar company. He was just a guy who wanted to see how things were really running. The feeling of anonymity felt both liberating and unsettling. But Marcus didn't have time to second-guess himself. This was happening. He grabbed his keys and walked out of his apartment, his mind racing with what he might discover. As he approached his car, the weight of the decision began to settle in. This wasn't just about improving his business. This was about finding out who his employees really were, what motivated them, and what obstacles they faced on a daily basis. If he could figure that out, he could fix everything. The drive to the store was short, but it felt longer than it was. Marcus had a lot of thoughts swirling in his head. What if the employees didn't respect him? What if they didn't care about the company he had built? What if this whole thing turned out to be a disaster? But then he reminded himself, this is what you need. This is the only way to truly understand what's happening. As he parked in the lot, he saw the familiar sign of his store across the street. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. It was time to go undercover. Marcus pushed open the glass door of his store, the familiar chime ringing as he stepped inside. The scent of freshly stocked merchandise and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights greeted him. He didn't feel like a CEO today. He felt like a stranger, an outsider who was entering a world he'd only seen from a distance. The layout of the store was just as he remembered it, organized and clean, with the shelves neatly stocked and a few customers browsing. The store was one of the company's flagship locations, and on any given day, it was a hub of activity. But today, it felt oddly still, like the calm before a storm. Marcus walked slowly through the aisles, pretending to browse, but his mind was focused on everything but the products. His eyes darted to the employees, observing how they interacted with each other and with customers. A few of them were on their phones, others were folding clothes with robotic precision, but none of them seemed particularly engaged. He moved towards the center of the store, where a display of new merchandise stood proudly. A young woman in her early 20s was standing nearby, stacking items on a shelf. She looked up briefly, but when her eyes met Marcus, she quickly looked away, not even offering a smile. Marcus couldn't help but feel a slight sting of disappointment. He was used to being acknowledged, even if he was just another customer. But here, he was invisible. The workers weren't rude. They were just indifferent. He walked over to another part of the store, near the checkout counter, where a manager, a man named James, was chatting with a couple of customers. As Marcus approached, he overheard part of the conversation. "Yeah, we've got a new line of jackets coming in next week. Pretty sure they'll sell out fast," James was saying, his tone casual, almost dismissive. Marcus glanced at the customers, who were nodding along politely. They didn't seem overly interested, and neither did James. It was clear that he wasn't trying to build any rapport. He was just doing his job. Marcus stopped in his tracks, feeling a sense of frustration rising within him. Was this what his company had become? Was this the atmosphere he had worked so hard to create? He had always preached about the importance of customer service, the value of making every customer feel important, but here he was, witnessing something different, something flat, uninspired. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that he hadn't come here to judge just yet. He had to observe first. So, he decided to go to the back of the store where the employees gathered during breaks. He was curious to see how they interacted when they thought no one was watching. As he walked toward the back room, he passed by a group of employees chatting near the stockroom. A man, probably in his late 20s, was laughing loudly at something on his phone. The others were listening, but their eyes weren't really on him. They were either scrolling through their own devices or idly looking around the room. Marcus stood a little farther away, trying not to be noticed. He overheard a few snippets of their conversation. "Man, I don't even know why we're still here. I can't stand the manager. He's always breathing down our necks," the young man said, his voice tinged with frustration. One of the women nodded, her arms crossed. "Yeah, it's like they don't care about us. Just get the job done and shut up, you know?" Marcus felt his stomach twist. The comments were nothing new, but hearing them firsthand, in his own store, made him realize just how deeply the disconnect had set in. It wasn't just about the customers. The employees were checked out too. They weren't happy, and it was affecting their work. Marcus knew this wasn't a coincidence. It was a sign that something fundamental was wrong with how the business was operating. There was a lack of engagement, a lack of ownership, and above all, a lack of respect. He didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about one rude employee or one bad interaction. This was a systemic issue, and it was bigger than he had thought. As he stood there in the back room, trying to process what he had heard, one of the employees, a woman in her 30s, caught his eye. She gave him a brief smile, then turned her attention back to the group. The smile wasn't warm, but it was polite. Marcus nodded, acknowledging her before stepping away from the group. He didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable, but he was starting to feel the weight of this experience settling in. He had to know more. This wasn't enough. Marcus made his way back to the front of the store, his mind racing. The air felt heavier now, charged with the realization that he had so much more to uncover. He hadn't been in the store for more than an hour, but already, he felt like he was learning more than he had in the past year of sitting in meetings and reviewing reports. He knew he couldn't keep walking around as a bystander. It was time to dig deeper. Just as Marcus was about to approach the sales floor again, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to find the young man from the register earlier, the one who had refused to help him. He had a sheepish look on his face, almost like he was regretting the way he'd acted. "Hey, I'm sorry about earlier," the young man said awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. I was having a bad day. Can I help you with anything? Marcus looked him in the eyes, surprised by the sudden change in attitude. It was a small gesture, but it told him something. There was still hope. People could change, and maybe, just maybe, this store wasn't beyond saving. Marcus forced a smile, his expression softening. Actually, yeah. I'd love to know more about your store's products. Can you show me around? The young man nodded, a bit more enthusiastic now. Sure, I can do that. Let me show you what we have. As they walked through the store together, Marcus couldn't help but feel a flicker of optimism. He didn't know yet how he would fix things, but at least, for now, he knew that he was getting the answers he needed. Marcus followed the young man, whose name he learned was Jake, as he led him through the store, pointing out different sections and explaining the features of the latest products. It was clear Jake was trying, but there was still something missing in his delivery. His passion seemed forced, almost like a script he had memorized but never truly felt. As they walked, Marcus couldn't help but notice the employees he passed along the way. Some were chatting idly, others were folding clothes or adjusting displays. They barely acknowledged Marcus, too wrapped up in their own worlds. It was disheartening. This wasn't the team he had envisioned when he first built this company. But Marcus also knew that change didn't happen overnight. If he wanted to make a difference, he had to start small, build trust, and understand what was going wrong. He was starting to see the root of the problem. It wasn't just about the rude employees or the lack of energy. It was about a deeper issue. The company's culture had eroded. Employees weren't invested in their work, and worse, they weren't invested in the company. They had stopped caring. And that wasn't something that could be fixed with a new slogan or a bonus program. It required real change, starting with how he, as the CEO, approached the business. Jake paused by a clothing rack, shifting nervously as Marcus looked over the items. So, what do you think of the store so far? He asked, clearly trying to engage. Marcus gave him a thoughtful smile. It's a good start, but it feels like something is missing, don't you think? Like there's no energy here, no sense of excitement. Jake shrugged, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Yeah, I mean, it's just how it is, I guess. It's hard to stay motivated when you're just told what to do and never get any feedback. And the pay? Well, it's not like it's great either. Marcus' heart sank. He had suspected it, but hearing it from Jake confirmed his fears. The lack of motivation wasn't just about the employees' attitudes. It was about the system they were working under. They felt undervalued, underpaid, and disconnected from the bigger picture. How long have you been working here? Marcus asked, trying to keep the conversation going. About a year now, Jake replied. It's not a bad job, really. But yeah, sometimes it feels like we're just stuck in a loop. Same stuff every day, no chance to move up. Marcus processed the words, taking them in. This was a part of the puzzle. The company had grown so quickly that it had neglected to build a meaningful path for its employees. There was no sense of progression, no real incentive to excel. He had built a brand that focused on customer experience, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten about the people who made that experience possible. So, if you could change something around here, what would it be? Marcus asked, hoping to get more insight. Jake's face lit up a little as he thought about the question. Well, I'd definitely make sure we get more training, and maybe more recognition when we do a good job. And honestly, the scheduling could be better. Sometimes, we get shifts that are all over the place. It was all becoming clearer. The lack of training, the poor scheduling, the low recognition. These were all contributing factors to the discontent within the workforce. The employees didn't feel equipped to do their jobs well, they didn't feel appreciated, and they weren't being given the tools to succeed. Marcus had thought he was doing enough, but now he realized just how much more needed to be done. Jake's voice broke Marcus' thoughts. I know I'm just an employee, but, I think the company could do a lot better if we felt like we were a part of something bigger, Right now, it just feels like just a job. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. He's right. He had built a company based on a vision of growth, but the employees didn't see that vision. They saw a paycheck and a series of tasks. And that was a problem. Thanks for being honest with me, Jake. It means a lot, Marcus said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. Jake smiled awkwardly. No problem, man. I mean, you asked. And, I guess you're the boss, right? So, you should know what's going on. Marcus chuckled softly. I guess I am, huh? As the two of them walked back toward the front of the store, Marcus' mind was buzzing with possibilities. He couldn't change everything in one day, but the first step was clear. He needed to rebuild the company's culture from the inside out. If he wanted his employees to be excited about their work, he had to show them that he was invested in their success too. Marcus spent the next few hours walking through the store, observing more interactions, listening to more conversations. The atmosphere was still flat, but with each passing minute, he was gathering more pieces of the puzzle. He watched as some of the employees interacted with customers, trying to gauge whether it was a lack of training or just a lack of motivation. By the time the shift change came around, Marcus felt like he had enough to work with. He'd seen enough to know that there were serious issues that needed fixing, and he wasn't about to sit idly by. He was going to make changes, and he was going to do it in a way that no one would see coming. As Marcus left the store that day, he couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and determination. There was so much to fix, so much to rebuild. But this was only the beginning. The real challenge was going to be showing his employees that their work mattered, that they were valued, and that the company was a place where they could grow. It wasn't just about profits. It was about creating something sustainable, a culture that would last for generations. The following morning, Marcus woke up earlier than usual. It had been a long, restless night of reflection and planning. He was ready to tackle the challenge head-on, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. The changes he envisioned for his company would require teamwork, open communication, and a shift in how he interacted with his employees. He couldn't keep hiding behind his title or the polished image of being the CEO. If he wanted them to believe in the change, he had to believe in it first. After a quick breakfast, Marcus made his way to his office. He had already decided on his first course of action. He was going to implement a series of surprise store visits over the next few weeks. It was time to see the company from all angles, talk to employees at different levels, and make himself available for their concerns. But this wasn't going to be a one-man job. He needed to pull in a team he trusted, people who had the same drive for change. He immediately picked up the phone and called Sarah, his assistant, who had been with him through thick and thin. Hey, Sarah, Marcus said when she picked up. I need you to schedule a meeting for me with the senior leadership team. ASAP. There was a pause before Sarah replied. Is everything okay? You sound different. Marcus smiled at her keen intuition. Yeah, everything's fine. I need to talk to the team about something. We need to start making some changes, big ones. I'll set it up right away, she said. Let me know if you need anything else. After hanging up, Marcus felt a wave of relief. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but it was a start. As the day wore on, he was consumed by the thought of how to turn things around. Not just on a surface level, but at the core of his business. His employees needed more than just recognition. They needed to know that they had a future within the company, that their voices mattered. At noon, Marcus met with his leadership team in the conference room, a sleek, minimalist space at the heart of the corporate office. Sarah had already set up the meeting, and by the time Marcus walked in, the team was already seated around the long table. The air was thick with anticipation. They all knew Marcus was a man of few words in meetings, preferring to be direct and to the point. Today, however, there was a different energy in the room. Good afternoon, everyone, Marcus began, his voice firm but calm. I called you all here today because it's time we have a real conversation about the direction of the company. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. He could see a mix of curiosity and concern on the faces of his team, but none of them spoke. They were waiting for him to continue. I've been going undercover in our stores for the past few days, Marcus continued, and I've seen some things I didn't want to see, things I couldn't ignore. Our employees are disengaged. Our culture is slipping. Our customers aren't getting the experience they deserve, and I take full responsibility for that. He glanced around the room, looking each person in the eye. I've been so caught up in numbers, meetings, and growth that I've lost touch with the people who make this company what it is, our employees. But that stops now. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Marcus' words sinking in. Finally, one of the senior managers, Lauren, spoke up. Marcus, we've all seen some of these issues, but you're right. We've been so focused on the big picture that we forgot about the smaller, more important parts of the business. What exactly do you have in mind? Marcus looked at her, a nod of appreciation for her candor. We need to take a step back. We need to rebuild our company culture from the ground up, and that starts with making sure every single employee feels heard, valued, and equipped to succeed. That means more than just a new incentive program. It means better training, more transparent communication, and most importantly, showing our employees that we care about them as individuals, not just as workers. Another manager, James, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. So, you're saying we need to overhaul everything? The culture, the training, the way we engage with our employees. Marcus nodded. Yes, but we don't just throw out everything we've built. We need to focus on creating a foundation that will allow us to grow in a way that aligns with our values. That means we need to listen to our employees, understand their challenges, and empower them to do their best work. There was a murmur of agreement around the table, but Marcus knew the real test would come in the follow-up meetings, the hard work that would be required to implement these changes. But this meeting was the first step in the right direction. As the meeting wrapped up, Marcus felt a sense of determination. His leadership team had listened, and while there were still questions and concerns to be addressed, the tone had shifted. They were on board. Now it was time to take action. The following week, Marcus returned to the stores, this time with a new approach. Instead of simply observing, he began to engage directly with employees. He introduced himself as a new guy at the company, just someone looking to get a sense of the place. He spent time on the sales floor, folding clothes, stocking shelves, and chatting with employees when the opportunity arose. The reactions were mixed. Some employees were cautious, unsure of his intentions. Others were more open, willing to share their frustrations. He was careful to listen, to ask the right questions, and to offer genuine support. It wasn't about finding problems. It was about understanding their experience and finding ways to make it better. In one of the stores, he encountered an older employee, Susan, who had been with the company for over a decade. She was one of the few who recognized him instantly, but instead of calling him out, she leaned in and whispered, "You're the boss, right?" "I thought you might be." Marcus smiled. "I am, and I'm here to make sure you all get the support you need." Susan gave him a knowing look. "You've got a long way to go, but if you're serious about this, I'm all in." Her words were a moment of validation for Marcus. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was already starting to feel like it might be possible. Over the next few days, Marcus visited multiple store locations, spending time with employees, asking questions, and taking notes. He was starting to see the patterns, some good, some troubling, but above all, he was learning. The more he interacted with the staff, the more he realized that the problems weren't just isolated to a few disgruntled workers. The issue ran deeper than that. It was a cultural shift, a disconnect that had been brewing for years. But as the days went on, he also noticed something unexpected. The more he showed up, the more employees started to open up. Small conversations, quick exchanges, and even offhand comments started to paint a clearer picture of what needed to change. One afternoon, Marcus found himself in a small coffee shop, sitting across from Sarah, his assistant, and talking strategy. He had invited her out to get her input and discuss what he had learned so far. "It's clear that the team feels underappreciated," Marcus said, stirring his coffee slowly. "But it's also more than that. There's a sense of frustration, like they don't have control over their work or their environment. They feel stuck." Sarah nodded. "Yeah, I've noticed that too. And it's not just about pay or benefits. It's about the lack of a clear path forward. Most employees don't feel like they have room to grow. I think that's why they don't really care about the work." Marcus sighed, staring out the window. "I've been so focused on expanding the business, getting more stores open, making more money. But in doing that, I've ignored the most important part of the company, the people who make everything run. I think I've failed them in that sense." Sarah shook her head. "I wouldn't say you've failed them, Marcus. You've just been so caught up in the bigger picture that you missed the smaller one. But now, you're doing something about it. And that's what counts." He appreciated her optimism, but he wasn't ready to let himself off the hook just yet. "Right, but fixing this is going to take time. A lot of time. and I need to get the leadership team on board with a complete overhaul of our company culture. I can't do it alone. I think they're ready to listen, Sarah said, her voice steady. You've made it clear that this isn't just about numbers anymore. It's about people, and people are going to respond to that. Just make sure you're consistent. That last word hit him hard. Consistent. He had always been the kind of leader who moved fast, who wanted to see results quickly. But consistency was the real key. He needed to prove that he was there for the long haul, not just for a few weeks of changes and then back to business as usual. I'll be consistent, he said, his voice firm. We'll start with small changes, real, tangible things that make an impact. I'll work with the leadership team to put together a comprehensive plan for training, recognition, and growth opportunities. But it has to be more than just paperwork. It has to be a cultural shift. Later that week, Marcus called a meeting with his senior leadership team once again. This time, there was an air of urgency in the room. He had been brainstorming all week and had come up with some concrete ideas. He wasn't going to wait around for things to improve on their own. He needed to drive change, and he needed their full support. All right, team, Marcus started, looking around the table at each of his managers. I've spent the last few days in the stores, talking to our employees, getting a feel for what's really going on. And I have to say, things aren't as great as we'd hoped. It's clear we've let the culture slip. We need to rebuild trust, re-engage our employees, and show them that we value them. But we need to do more than just talk about it. We need action. He paused, letting his words sink in. I've got a plan, he continued. First, we need to improve training. Every employee should feel confident in their role, from sales associates to management. No more sink or swim. We'll implement a comprehensive training program that focuses on both technical skills and customer service. I want to make sure that everyone, no matter where they are in the company, feels equipped to succeed. Lauren, the senior manager, raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to get people on board with that? Training takes time, and we can't afford to slow things down too much. Marcus nodded, understanding the concern. It won't be immediate, but I'm willing to make it a priority. We'll start with a pilot program in 2 stores. We'll work with the managers there to develop a training schedule, and we'll get feedback from employees along the way. If it works, we'll roll it out company-wide. We also need to integrate a feedback loop so employees can voice concerns or suggestions as we go. Another manager, Chris, spoke up. I think that's a great idea. But what about employee recognition? Right now, it feels like we only hear from people when something's gone wrong. Exactly, Marcus said, leaning forward. We need to build a culture of appreciation. Recognition should be a daily thing, not just an annual bonus or a thank you at the end of the year. We'll implement a shout-out system where employees can nominate each other for great work. Managers will have regular check-ins with staff to make sure they feel supported. And we need to celebrate wins, no matter how small. I like it, Lauren said with a smile. It's simple but effective. People want to feel seen. And lastly, Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, we need to create a clear path for growth. If we want our employees to stay with us, we need to give them a reason to grow within the company. I don't want anyone to feel like they're stuck. We'll introduce a mentorship program where senior employees can help guide newcomers. And we'll work on creating clear career development plans for everyone. There was a silence in the room as his leadership team processed what he had laid out. Then, slowly, one by one, they nodded. I'm on board, Chris said. Let's do this. Lauren agreed. It's going to be a lot of work, but it's the right thing to do. Marcus smiled, relieved to see them on his side. Good. I know it's going to take time, but if we're consistent and committed, we can make this company something our employees are proud of again. That night, as Marcus left the office, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, he was excited for what was to come. The foundation had been laid. Now it was time to build. It had been a few weeks since Marcus had laid out his plans for change, and while the excitement in the leadership team was palpable, not everyone was on board. As much as Marcus wanted to believe that everything would fall into place, he knew better than to expect smooth sailing. There were always obstacles, and he could feel them creeping up on him. His first test came when he visited one of the stores that had been selected for the pilot training program. He had received a glowing report from the store manager, Amy, who had been on board with the changes. The feedback had been overwhelmingly positive, and he was eager to see it for himself. However, when he arrived at the store, he was immediately met with a subtle but unmistakable tension in the air. "Good morning, Marcus." Amy greeted him with a tight smile, clearly trying to hide any nervousness. "It's so great to have you here. Everything's been going really well, actually. We're seeing some improvements already." "That's great to hear," Marcus replied, smiling in return, but something was off. The energy in the store felt different from what he had imagined. It wasn't bad, it was just cold. Employees weren't engaging as much as he had hoped. He noticed a few of them talking in hushed tones by the register, eyeing him every so often. As he walked through the aisles, Marcus made a point to speak with a few employees, trying to gauge their thoughts on the new training and the recent changes. He approached a young woman who was organizing products on a shelf. Her name tag read Katie. "How's everything going, Katie?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone casual. "How's the new training program been for you?" Katie glanced up from the shelf and gave him a polite, almost rehearsed smile. "It's fine. We're still getting used to it, but it's fine." Marcus noticed her lack of enthusiasm and tried again. "Are you feeling more confident in your role now that you've had some training?" Katie hesitated, her eyes darting toward her coworkers who were pretending not to notice. Finally, she spoke. "I mean, yeah, it's better than before, but honestly, it's hard to feel motivated when you're just doing the same thing every day. And some of us don't exactly agree with all the changes, to be honest." Marcus frowned, sensing there was more to the story. "What do you mean?" Katie lowered her voice. "I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but some of us don't feel like these changes are really going to fix things. It's just more work for us with no real reward. You know what I mean?" "I don't know. It just doesn't feel genuine." Marcus' heart sank a little. He had known that not everyone would embrace the changes right away, but this level of resistance was unexpected. It wasn't just apathy, it was distrust. Before he could respond, Amy appeared at his side. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. Marcus gave her a questioning look. "Katie seems a little unsure about the training, Amy. Do you know what's going on?" Amy's smile faltered, and for a moment, she looked away, almost like she was caught off guard. "Oh, it's just a few employees who are having trouble adjusting to the new changes, but we're working through it." Katie's expression darkened, and she quickly returned to her work without another word. Marcus could tell there was more to the situation, but he didn't want to press it further in front of everyone. As he left the store that day, his mind raced. He had just seen the first signs of real resistance to his plans, but he wasn't about to give up. If anything, this only reinforced how crucial it was to get to the root of the problem. That evening, as he sat in his office, Marcus reflected on what had happened. The resistance he had encountered in the store wasn't an isolated incident. He could feel it. There was an undercurrent of skepticism that ran deeper than he initially thought. His employees were hesitant, unsure if these changes were genuine or just another corporate initiative that would be forgotten in a few months. It wasn't just about training or recognition anymore. It was about rebuilding trust. They didn't believe in the vision, not yet, at least. Marcus thought back to his conversation with Sarah. She had told him to be consistent. Consistency. It was something he had to prove, not just in his actions, but in his words too. He couldn't afford to just show up and expect everything to change. He had to be a part of the process, every single day. The next day, Marcus made a decision. He called for a company-wide meeting, one that he intended to make personal. No more emails, no more anonymous surveys. He was going to face his employees directly and give them the opportunity to voice their concerns. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Marcus spent the next few days preparing. He knew that there would be resistance, but he had to face it head-on. This wasn't just about presenting a polished version of himself. It was about showing vulnerability and honesty. If he wanted his employees to believe in the changes, he had to show them that he believed in them, too. The day of the meeting, Marcus stood in front of a crowded room of employees. They were all gathered in the break room, sitting on chairs or standing in small groups. It was a mix of familiar faces and strangers, Employees from different departments, different stores, all gathered in one space. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This wasn't a speech to investors. This wasn't about numbers or profit margins. This was about connecting with his team. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus began, his voice steady but sincere. "I want to start by thanking you all for being here today. I know that these past few weeks have been a bit chaotic, and that's on me. I've asked a lot of you, and I know not everyone has seen the changes as quickly as we hoped. But I'm here to tell you that I'm committed to making this work, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because I believe in this company. I believe in you." There was a slight shift in the room, and Marcus could feel the skepticism hanging in the air. He continued, "I've spent time in the stores, talking to many of you, and I've heard your concerns. Some of you feel like we're just going through the motions. Some of you think that these changes aren't enough. And some of you are worried that nothing is going to change at all. And I understand that." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The truth is, this isn't just about new training or recognition programs. It's about something bigger. It's about trust. It's about knowing that we're all in this together and that we're building something worth being a part of." The room remained quiet, but Marcus could feel the weight of his words settling in. "I'm not here to make empty promises," he said. "I'm here to do the work, day in and day out, with you. We're going to take this one step at a time. But I need you to be honest with me. I need you to tell me what's working, what's not working, and how we can do better. This is a two-way street. We can't rebuild this company without your help." A few employees exchanged glances. There was still some hesitation in the air, but Marcus knew this was just the beginning. He had taken the first step toward rebuilding the trust that had been lost, but there was much more work to be done. As the meeting came to a close, Marcus was cautiously optimistic. The resistance hadn't disappeared, but he had made a small crack in the wall. That was enough for now. One conversation, one person at a time. The weeks following the company-wide meeting were crucial. Marcus had laid the groundwork for change, but the real challenge was proving that his actions would align with his words. He knew that rebuilding trust wasn't something that could happen overnight. If anything, it was the slow, patient work of repairing relationships, one interaction at a time. He made it a point to visit different stores, not just for the usual check-ins, but to genuinely interact with his employees. He shadowed them during shifts, offering help where he could, and making sure to listen more than he spoke. The more he showed up, the more he felt the weight of his role in a new way. At first, the responses from his team were mixed. Some employees still maintained a certain distance, reluctant to believe in the changes. But others began to warm up, offering feedback that was both constructive and honest. One afternoon, Marcus found himself in a store on the outskirts of the city, where he met Rachel, a senior sales associate who had been with the company for nearly 5 years. She was tough, with a no-nonsense attitude, but there was something in her eyes that Marcus recognized: frustration. As he walked up to her, he could tell she was cautious, unsure of how to approach this sudden shift in leadership. Marcus smiled, trying to ease the tension. "Hey, Rachel, how's it going today?" She looked at him, briefly considering whether to engage or not. "It's been all right. You know, just the usual." "Yeah, I get it," Marcus replied. "But I'm here to hear the real story. How are things really going?" Rachel let out a small sigh. "All right, if you want to know, it's been hard. We're trying to keep up with all the changes, but to be honest, it feels like we're just doing things because we have to, not because it matters. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's really going to make a difference." Marcus nodded, taking her words seriously. "I get it, and I respect your honesty. We've pushed a lot of changes at once, and I can see how that feels overwhelming. But here's what I need from you, Rachel. I need to know what's working and what isn't. We can't fix what we don't see, and I need your perspective. I'm not just asking as a CEO. I'm asking as someone who wants to make this company better for everyone, including you." Rachel studied him for a moment, her arms crossed as she thought over his words. Finally, she spoke. "Well, I'll tell you this. People are tired. Tired of being told what to do without being heard. The training helps, but it's just not enough if we don't feel like we have any real say in what's going on. And that's the real issue. No one feels like they have control over their work." Marcus felt a pang in his chest as he listened to her. This was what he had feared. His employees were disconnected from the process. They didn't feel like they were part of the solution. "I hear you," he said softly, "and that's on me. I didn't do enough to involve everyone, but we're going to fix that. You'll be heard. I promise." Rachel gave him a skeptical look. "All right, but you've got to show us. Not just tell us. We're done with promises. We need action." "I get it," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "And that's what I'm here for. Action. Let's keep talking, okay? Let's make sure this isn't just another corporate initiative that fades away." Back at the corporate office, Marcus began to realize the true magnitude of the challenge ahead. The culture shift wasn't going to be easy, and every interaction with employees made that clearer. But what he hadn't anticipated was how this journey would change him. He was beginning to see things from their perspective, feeling the weight of their frustration and their need for real change. To move forward, he knew he couldn't simply offer up solutions from the top down. He had to create a dialogue, an ongoing conversation about what was working and what wasn't. It wasn't about dictating policies. It was about genuinely listening to the people on the ground and involving them in the process. That evening, Marcus sat down with Sarah to discuss the next steps. They had already implemented some of the basic changes, but he knew they needed to go deeper. Much deeper. "We've made some progress with the training and recognition programs," Marcus said, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm hearing a lot of concerns about feeling disconnected from the decision-making process." Rachel brought up a good point today. It's not just about giving employees tools, it's about giving them ownership. If they don't feel like they have a voice, they won't buy into the changes. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. People need to feel invested in the process, not just as passive recipients of change. Maybe it's time to involve them more directly. What if we set up an employee advisory board? A group of people from different stores and departments who can share their insights and give us feedback on what's working and what needs improvement." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "An advisory board? I like the sound of that. But we'd need to make sure it's not just a token gesture. The board has to have real influence, real decision-making power." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "It can't just be a box to check off. The board needs to be a platform for employees to speak openly and have their voices heard by the leadership team. If we give them a real role in shaping the future, it'll help build trust and encourage participation." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the idea. "Let's do it. Let's create an advisory board, and I'll make sure we listen. We'll make it clear that their input will directly influence the changes we make." In the coming weeks, the advisory board took shape. The group was diverse, with representatives from different stores, departments, and levels of experience. Marcus was eager to hear their thoughts, and as they began meeting, he saw firsthand how powerful it was to involve employees in the decision-making process. For the first time, people were speaking up, not just about the problems, but about the solutions. As Marcus sat in the meetings, he felt a shift in the air. This wasn't just him making changes. It was a collective effort. For the first time, he was seeing his employees not as separate parts of a machine, but as a team. And that was exactly what he needed. As the days went on, the atmosphere in the stores began to change. Employees felt more engaged, more invested. They knew their voices were being heard, and that made all the difference. And while there were still moments of resistance, the tide was slowly turning in Marcus' favor. He wasn't done yet. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, he could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The momentum was slowly building. The advisory board was proving to be an invaluable resource, and Marcus could see a tangible shift in the atmosphere. There was a sense of unity forming across departments, and employees seemed more open to the changes. But just when he thought things were starting to stabilize, he received a call that would test his leadership in a way he hadn't anticipated. It was late in the afternoon when Marcus' phone rang. The name on the screen was Jenna, the store manager of a flagship location downtown. She had been one of the first managers to support his vision, and they had worked closely together to implement the new training programs. So when her name popped up, he answered quickly, expecting another routine update. "Hey, Jenna, what's going on?" he asked, his voice light and casual. "Marcus, I don't know how to say this, but we've got a situation here." Jenna's voice was tight, and there was a clear note of urgency in her tone. "We've had some pushback. from the team, specifically from the senior staff. They've got concerns, and it's escalating. It's not just a couple of complaints. It's becoming a real issue. Marcus straightened up in his chair, his mind immediately racing. What kind of pushback? What are they saying? Genocide. They're frustrated with the new changes. They feel like they weren't consulted enough, and now they're questioning whether these changes are really going to work. A few of them are even talking about leaving the company. It's bad, Marcus. The knot in his stomach tightened. He had expected resistance, but this felt different. This wasn't just a few skeptical employees. It was a large group of influential leaders within the store, people who held a significant amount of sway over the rest of the team. I'm heading over there, Marcus said without hesitation. I'll be there in the next hour. Let's sit down and figure this out. Don't make any decisions without me, all right? Understood. But just so you know, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep the peace here. Things are starting to feel volatile. The line went quiet for a moment as Marcus processed her words. There was no avoiding it now. He had to face this head-on. An hour later, Marcus walked into the flagship store, immediately sensing the tension in the air. The employees who were usually animated and cheerful had fallen into a quieter, more reserved rhythm. Conversations were hushed, and there was a noticeable divide among the staff. Jenna was waiting for him by the front counter, looking stressed but trying her best to maintain a professional demeanor. She led Marcus to the back office, where a group of senior staff members was already gathered. As soon as he entered, the room grew still. The atmosphere was thick with discomfort, but Marcus wasn't going to shy away from the confrontation. These were the leaders of the store. If he couldn't win them over, then the rest of the team would follow suit. Thank you all for meeting with me, Marcus said, taking a seat at the head of the table. I know there's been some frustration, and I want to hear all of it. We've got to have a real conversation here. One of the senior staff members, David, a tall man with a serious demeanor, spoke first. Look, Marcus, we get that you want to make changes, but these shifts are happening too fast. You're throwing a lot at us without giving us the time to adapt. People are overwhelmed. And the worst part is, we don't feel like our voices are being heard. There's no real input from us in this process. It's just happening to us. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the point. I hear you, David. I really do. I should have involved you more from the beginning. But here's the thing. I need you. You're the ones who know this store inside and out. Without your support, none of these changes will work. This is a partnership, not a top-down directive. Another senior staff member, Linda, who had been relatively quiet up until this point, chimed in. It's not just about being heard, Marcus. It's about trust. People feel like these changes are just going to fizzle out like all the other initiatives we've had in the past. They're scared. Scared of change, yes, but also scared that they're going to put in all this work for nothing. The weight of her words landed heavily on Marcus. He had known that trust was at the heart of the resistance, but hearing it articulated so clearly made it feel even more urgent. I know that trust has been broken in the past, and I get why it's hard to believe that this time will be any different. But I promise you, this is different, Marcus said, his voice firm but sincere. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for the long haul, and I want you all to be a part of this process. This is about creating something sustainable, something that we all own. But I need your help. There was a long silence as the room processed his words. Then, David spoke again, his tone softer than before. It's just hard to believe when it feels like the changes keep coming without any room for discussion. You're asking us to trust you, Marcus, but you've got to show us that you trust us too. Marcus leaned forward, looking each of them in the eye. I understand, and I'm committed to showing you that trust. From this point on, we're going to do things differently. We'll create a clear line of communication between leadership and the rest of the team. We'll slow down the changes and give everyone time to adjust. And most importantly, I'm going to make sure that your voices are heard every step of the way. The room was still, but there was a subtle shift. David, Linda, and the others exchanged glances, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. You're serious about this, aren't you? Linda asked quietly. I am, Marcus replied. I'm not here to force changes on anyone. I'm here to build something better for all of us. The next few days were crucial. Marcus spent the rest of the week at the flagship store, meeting one-on-one with the senior staff and organizing small group discussions. Slowly but surely, the tension began to ease. People began to speak more openly, sharing their concerns and their ideas. They still had doubts, but for the first time, they felt like they had a voice in the process. The real test, however, was yet to come. Would these new measures be enough to keep the team from splintering? Could Marcus build a sustainable trust with the store's leadership, or was this just a temporary fix? Marcus knew that the road ahead would be full of challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like they were headed in the right direction. The battle for trust had only just begun, but at least, for now, the fight felt a little less lonely. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What do you think of Marcus' approach to rebuilding trust? Is he on the right track, or is it too little, too late? Let's talk about it in the comments. The tension had been palpable the week after the meeting at the flagship store. Marcus had worked tirelessly to show the senior staff he was committed to change, but now the real challenge began. Keeping up the momentum, trust, once broken, wasn't something that could be fixed in a few meetings or with a handful of promises. Marcus knew this better than anyone. This was the long game. Back at the corporate office, he gathered his leadership team for a strategy session. He wasn't about to leave anything to chance. This was his chance to prove that he could not only manage a company but lead it through real transformation. All right, team, we've made some progress. We've started to rebuild trust at the store level, but there's still a lot of work to do, Marcus began, addressing the room full of department heads and senior managers. The flagship store was the tipping point. We've learned a lot, and now we have to decide what the next steps look like. Sarah, his right-hand woman, raised her hand, always the voice of reason in their meetings. Marcus, I think the next step is clear. We have to focus on communication. Open, honest, consistent communication with all employees. Not just the senior staff, but everyone. We need to make sure they know that this isn't just another round of corporate changes that will fade away. They need to see us taking action every day. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. You're right, Sarah. If we don't keep up the communication and transparency, all the progress we've made could unravel. We need to show them we mean it. But Sarah wasn't done. And I think we need to consider introducing more leadership training, not just for senior staff, but for mid-level managers too. We can't expect a cultural shift to happen if those at the middle of the hierarchy don't buy into it or know how to manage the changes on the ground. Marcus looked around the table. This was the kind of insight he needed from his leadership team. Everyone in the room was invested in the process, and it gave him the confidence to press forward. All right, I'm all in. Let's do it. We'll launch a company-wide training initiative focused on leadership and communication. We'll also launch weekly check-ins with every store and department to monitor how the changes are going and where we're falling short. The following weeks were a blur of action. Marcus knew this wasn't the time for hesitations or second-guessing. Every day, he visited stores, met with employees, and checked in with his leadership team. He kept the momentum going by staying visible and accessible. But it wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges, whether it was a department pushing back on a new policy, an upset employee feeling overwhelmed by the changes, or simply the emotional toll that constant progress demands. But there were moments of victory, too. Every time an employee spoke up, every time someone shared a success story or came to him with an idea, Marcus felt like they were moving in the right direction. He was creating a culture of collaboration, and for the first time, he was seeing the impact of his leadership. Then, one day, he got a call from Rachel, one of the employees he had connected with early on during his visits to the stores. She was the one who had first voiced her concerns about employees feeling unheard. Rachel had become an ally in his mission to change the culture of the company. Hey, Marcus. I just wanted to check in and let you know things are starting to shift around here, she said, her voice warmer than usual. Marcus smiled, already feeling a surge of hope. That's good to hear, Rachel. What's been working? Well, the new training programs are helping, and people are feeling more heard now that we're able to give feedback regularly. I'm seeing more engagement, even from the people who were most skeptical about the changes. I think you've really turned things around. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But we can't stop here. What else do we need to do? Rachel was quiet for a moment. Honestly, keep being visible. Keep being there. It's easy to lose sight of this when the day-to-day takes over, but you've got to make sure the communication stays consistent. If you let up, it'll feel like the changes don't matter anymore, and people will start to lose trust again. Marcus nodded. I won't forget that, Rachel. Thanks for the reminder. After the call, he sat in his office for a few moments, thinking about her words. Visibility, consistency, trust. These weren't just buzzwords or leadership slogans. This was the foundation of what he was trying to build. He had to be present, not just in meetings, but with the employees on the ground, in the trenches. That was where the real change would happen. The weeks turned into months, and the transformation at the company continued to evolve. Employees were more engaged, and the store managers were starting to see tangible results. The advisory board was a critical part of the process, providing invaluable feedback that allowed the company to adjust its approach and fine-tune the changes. Yet, despite the positive feedback, there were still moments of doubt. Marcus sometimes questioned whether the shift was deep enough, whether it was sustainable. He had seen how quickly things could unravel when trust was fragile, and he wasn't about to let that happen again. He knew that even though they had come a long way, this was still just the beginning. The company's success wasn't just about making strategic moves or implementing policies. It was about creating a culture that was built on a solid foundation of trust, collaboration, and mutual respect. It wasn't going to happen overnight, but Marcus was starting to see the results of his labor. The slow, steady progress was the most rewarding part of all. He was seeing people who had once felt disconnected, who had lost faith in the company's direction, now stand up and contribute in meaningful ways. They were no longer just employees. They were stakeholders in the company's success. One afternoon, as Marcus walked through the store floor, he stopped to chat with a group of employees who were working at the front registers. There was a new energy in the air, a buzz of excitement that wasn't there before. People were smiling, engaging with customers, and collaborating in ways that Marcus had only dreamed of when he first took over. As he approached the group, Rachel spotted him and waved him over with a grin. Marcus, I was just telling them how much things have changed since you started all of this. Marcus smiled back. It's good to see it happening. It feels real now. Rachel nodded, her eyes bright. It is real. People are invested in the changes now. They're starting to see it pay off. You're right. We've made a lot of progress, Marcus said, his voice full of quiet pride. But we can't stop here. We've got to keep moving forward. We have to stay connected. Rachel smiled. I think we're on the right path. But I agree, let's keep pushing. We've come this far, there's no turning back now. Marcus nodded, watching the team around him as they went back to work. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And that was enough for today. As the company continued to stabilize and grow, Marcus felt an undeniable sense of progress. Yet, as every leader knows, success isn't without its challenges. Just as things seemed to be on an upward trajectory, a storm was brewing on the horizon, one that Marcus couldn't have anticipated. It all started with an unexpected phone call late one evening. Marcus had just finished a long day of meetings and was unwinding at his apartment when his phone rang. The caller ID read Jenna, the manager of the flagship store once again. Hey, Jenna, what's going on? Marcus asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern. I don't know how to say this, Marcus, but there's been an incident. Jenna's voice trembled slightly, and Marcus felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. A fight broke out in the store, between two employees. It's bad, Marcus. The cops were called. The gravity of the situation hit Marcus instantly. A fight? In his flagship store? This wasn't just a minor issue. It was a sign of deeper problems. What happened? He asked, trying to stay calm. From what we can gather, it was over a personal dispute between two of the employees. But it's more than that. There are rumors going around the store that the new changes are creating a divide between the staff. Some people are embracing it, others are resisting, and it's causing a lot of tension. No one feels like they're on the same page anymore. Marcus exhaled sharply, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just a small disagreement. It was a full-on emotional crisis within the company. It was a sign that the fractures that had been brewing underneath the surface were beginning to show themselves. I'm coming over, Marcus said, already on his feet. Stay calm, Jenna. I'll be there as soon as I can. The drive to the store felt longer than usual. Marcus could barely focus on the road. The excitement of the past few months, the energy of transforming the company, seemed to fade away as he thought about the scene awaiting him. A fight in the flagship store could not only harm the morale of the team, but also damage the company's reputation. When he arrived, the flashing red and blue lights outside the store were enough to make his heart sink. He parked quickly, grabbed his jacket, and rushed inside, where Jenna and a few other store managers were standing near the entrance. Marcus, Jenna said, her face drawn with exhaustion. I don't know how to make sense of this. We've never had anything like this happen before. It's like everything we've been working for is unraveling. Marcus took a deep breath. Let's talk to the team first. We need to hear everyone's side before we make any decisions. Inside, the store was quieter than usual. A few employees were gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves, their eyes darting nervously when Marcus entered. It was clear that the tension was far from over. He walked up to a group of the store's senior employees, including David and Linda, the same managers he had worked with in the early days. They stood there, looking as troubled as Jenna. Let's have a conversation, Marcus said, trying to keep his tone even. I want to know what's going on here. What's really happening? David, always the straightforward one, stepped forward. Marcus, there's a divide here. A real divide. Some of the old-timers feel like they're being pushed out. The changes you brought in, training programs, new schedules, communication styles, they don't sit well with some people. And now, with this fight, it feels like it's all coming to a head. Linda nodded in agreement. The company's trying to evolve, but not everyone wants to evolve with it. There's a lot of anger building up, and it's spilling over into personal issues. This fight, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, taking in their words. This was more than just a communication breakdown. It was a clash of cultures. The shift he had worked so hard for was challenging employees who were used to the old ways of doing things. And while some embraced the change, others resisted it with every fiber of their being. I get it, Marcus said, opening his eyes again. I know these changes are hard, but we can't afford to let this divide us. We can't let personal issues, small or big, undermine everything we've worked for. This is bigger than any one person or issue. David sighed. But you're asking people to change, Marcus. Change isn't easy. We're asking people to rethink how they've been working for years. It's not just about the company's bottom line. It's about how people feel about their jobs, their roles, their futures here. Marcus nodded, his mind spinning. He understood their point. If employees felt disconnected from the company, felt like the changes were being forced on them, then nothing would stick. There would always be resistance, at every turn, at every decision. Here's what I'm going to do, Marcus said, taking charge. I'll stay here tonight. We're going to have an all-staff meeting tomorrow morning. I want everyone to voice their concerns, their frustrations, but we'll do it openly. There won't be any hiding, and there won't be any finger-pointing. I want everyone to feel heard, and then we'll take action. The next morning, Marcus stood before a crowd of employees, some who looked wary, some who looked downright hostile. He had seen this kind of situation before, but that didn't make it any easier. The weight of responsibility was heavier than ever. Thank you for being here today, Marcus began, his voice strong but calm. I know many of you are upset. I know things have been difficult. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to listen. The room fell silent, every pair of eyes locked on him. Some employees crossed their arms defensively, others stood with their arms by their sides, waiting for him to speak. I know that change is hard, he continued. I know that the way we've done things for years doesn't feel right for some of you now. And I understand the frustration that comes with feeling like you've been left behind. But this company isn't just a place to work. It's a place to grow. And I want you all to grow with us. Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. I'm not here to tell you that everything's perfect. Far from it. But we need to come together. We need to have honest conversations, not just about the changes we're making, but about how we can make this work for everyone. A few hands went up in the crowd. Marcus nodded at one of the employees. Go ahead. One of the younger employees, Samantha, spoke up. You've been pushing for these changes, but no one's really telling us why. We're just supposed to follow orders, but we don't see the big picture. We need to understand why this matters. Marcus met her gaze, his eyes steady. You're right. I've been so focused on the what and how that I haven't been clear enough about the why. Let me tell you, this isn't just about making the company more efficient. It's about creating a place where we can all thrive, where every one of you can grow in your role, can contribute to something bigger, and can take pride in your work. It's not about my vision for this company. It's about our vision for the future. The room was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, the employees began to nod. They weren't fully convinced yet, but Marcus could see the shift. He wasn't asking them to accept the changes all at once. He was asking for their trust. And that, at least, was a start. The aftermath of the all-staff meeting was far from immediate change, but it was a start. The employees seemed to appreciate the chance to air their grievances and see that Marcus was genuinely listening. But even as he walked out of the meeting room that day, he knew that the hardest part was still ahead of him. The damage had already been done, and it would take time to heal the rift that had formed among his staff. The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. Some employees were more willing to open up and embrace the changes, while others were still resistant. There were even a few who had quietly started looking for jobs elsewhere. Marcus had expected this. Change always came with pushback, but it still stung every time he heard about someone leaving. He couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right choices, or if he had pushed too hard, too fast. But for every employee that left, there were others who stayed, who gave the changes a chance. Slowly, things started to shift in a more positive direction. Staff began to take more ownership of their roles, and there was a noticeable increase in morale, particularly among the newer hires who had no attachment to the old way of doing things. One day, Marcus found himself back at the flagship store, walking through the aisles, reflecting on everything that had transpired. He wasn't there for any meetings or formal checks. He just wanted to observe, to get a sense of the atmosphere now that some time had passed. He wanted to know if things had really started to improve, or if the cracks were still there, waiting to widen. As he walked past the cash registers, he spotted Linda, one of the senior managers. She was chatting with a group of employees, and there was laughter in the air, a rare sound in the past few months. Marcus approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt, but wanting to see if the lightness in the room was real. Linda noticed him first, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Marcus," she greeted, stepping toward him. "Good to see you. How's everything going?" Marcus gave a small smile in return. Better than it was a few weeks ago, but still a lot of work to do. "Yeah," Linda agreed. "It's been tough, but I think people are starting to see the long-term value in the changes. Some of the old-timers are starting to come around. It's slow, but it's happening." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. He had always known that change wouldn't be instant, but seeing that spark of hope in Linda's eyes meant a lot. "How are the employees holding up?" he asked. "Do you think they're feeling better?" Linda paused, then said, "I think they're starting to understand what you were trying to do. They're seeing that it's not about just the company. It's about their personal growth too. The ones who've stuck around are getting more involved, and that's starting to make a real difference." Marcus looked around at the employees near the registers, observing their interactions. There was a quiet sense of camaraderie in the air, something he hadn't seen before. He couldn't pinpoint exactly when the shift had occurred, but it was clear that something had clicked. They weren't just working for a paycheck. They were working together to build something, to create something bigger than themselves. "I think we're getting there," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Linda. "But we've got a long way to go." Linda smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "You've done a lot already, Marcus. Don't forget that." But as things began to stabilize, there was one last challenge Marcus hadn't seen coming. An external one. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from his PR team. The news had broken. A major competitor in the industry had announced a surprise partnership with a tech giant to innovate their customer experience. The announcement had sent ripples through the media, and of course, the news outlets were already speculating about how this would affect his company. Headlines were beginning to form that painted his business as stagnant and behind the curve. The pressure was mounting. The media were quick to criticize everything from his leadership style to his company's ability to adapt in a fast-moving world. For a moment, Marcus felt the weight of it all, like the entire world was watching him, waiting for him to slip. "Marcus, we need to respond," his PR lead, Terry, told him. "This partnership is a game-changer for the industry. We can't afford to sit back and do nothing while everyone's focusing on this." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The last few months had been a struggle in their own right, but now the external pressure was threatening everything he'd worked for. Marcus knew his company needed to innovate. He knew they couldn't afford to fall behind. But the last thing he wanted was to put more strain on his already overworked staff. "What do we have in the pipeline?" Marcus asked, trying to remain calm. Terry flipped through a few documents on her tablet before answering. "We've got a few new projects in development, but nothing on the scale of what the competitor is launching. We've got to speed up our timelines, or we risk losing market share." Marcus thought about it for a moment. He could feel the tension building in his chest. There was no easy solution to this. He couldn't push his team any harder. They had already been through a lot. But at the same time, if he didn't act quickly, the consequences could be dire. "We need to step up our game," Marcus said, after a long pause. "But we also need to make sure we're doing it the right way. We're not just going to throw something out there to compete. We're going to make something that matters. We'll push forward with our projects, but we need to make sure we're not compromising our values in the process. We need to be intentional about how we evolve." Terry nodded, her expression serious. "I'll start working with the teams to see how we can expedite our development efforts without sacrificing quality." As Marcus hung up the phone, he took a deep breath. The pressure from the competition was just one more hurdle in an already difficult journey. But the lessons of the past few months weighed heavily on him. This wasn't just about beating the competition. It was about leading his team through adversity with integrity and purpose. He wasn't going to rush the process just to keep up with others. If they were going to innovate, they were going to do it on their own terms. Later that week, Marcus gathered his leadership team for an urgent meeting to discuss the new development plans. His focus was clear. They had to innovate, but they couldn't afford to lose sight of the values that had started to bring their team together. "We're going to rise to this challenge," Marcus said, looking at each person in the room. "But we're going to do it with purpose. We've worked hard to build a culture of collaboration and trust. We won't let that go just to win some quick market share." Sarah, always a steady voice, nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We don't want to just play catch-up. We've got to lead in a way that reflects who we are as a company." As the meeting continued, Marcus felt a renewed sense of determination. Yes, the pressure from the competition was real, but he knew that his team had the strength to overcome it. They had already proven they could rebuild trust and face down adversity. Now, it was time to rise to the occasion once again. The days following the urgent leadership meeting were filled with intense brainstorming and planning. The company was under pressure to innovate quickly, but Marcus was determined not to lose the heart and integrity of what they had built. The sense of unity among his team, though still fragile, was more important than ever. He couldn't risk letting external forces tear apart the progress they had made. The media continued to fuel the competition, calling them stagnant and lacking vision. But despite the noise, Marcus knew that staying true to their core values was the key to long-term success. There was no shortcut to true innovation. It had to come from within. Then, unexpectedly, help came from someone Marcus hadn't anticipated. It was late one Thursday afternoon when Marcus received an email from Catherine, a former executive at a rival company that had recently been acquired. Catherine had been one of the few people Marcus admired in the industry, a brilliant strategist with a reputation for thinking outside the box. Marcus had met her briefly at an industry conference years ago, and they had exchanged a few pleasantries, but they had never been in close contact. The email was short but to the point. "Marcus, I've been following your progress, and I believe you're on the verge of something great. If you're open to it, I'd love to sit down and talk about some ideas I have that could help push your vision forward. I know what it's like to be under pressure to innovate quickly, and I might be able to help." Marcus stared at the email for a moment, his mind racing. He had to admit, the thought of working with Catherine intrigued him. She had a reputation for turning around companies in crisis, and her experience could be exactly what they needed. He didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone and dialed her number. Catherine's voice on the other end of the line was warm but direct. "Marcus, it's great to hear from you. I'm glad you reached out. I've been following what you're doing, and I think you've got a solid foundation. But I know how challenging it can be when the world is expecting results and the pressure's on. I'd love to help however I can." Marcus felt a wave of relief at her tone. "I appreciate that, Catherine. We're at a crossroads right now. Our competition just made a big move, and it feels like we're fighting against time. We need to innovate, but I want to do it in a way that keeps our people engaged and motivated." "I get it," Catherine said. "You've got a strong team, but there's no question that the external pressure can mess with internal morale. What I'd recommend is starting with what you already have. The internal changes you've made, the way you're fostering trust and collaboration, that's your edge. But now you need to create a product or service that reflects that same collaborative spirit." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "That's exactly what I've been thinking. We've focused so much on fixing internal issues, but we haven't really defined what we stand for externally, beyond our standard products. How do we make that connection?" Catherine paused before responding. "You need to rethink your relationship with your customers. Instead of just offering them products, offer them an experience. Think of it like a partnership. People today want to feel that the brands they buy from stand for something more than just profits. And that starts by being transparent about who you are and what you're doing." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "A partnership? You mean, like co-creating with the customer?" "Exactly," Catherine replied, her voice growing more animated. "You've got the customer service base. You've got the teams that are starting to work together. Now, bring your customers into that fold. Ask them what they want, how they want to engage with your products. Let them feel like they're a part of the brand's journey. It'll be a game changer." The conversation with Catherine was a turning point for Marcus. He had always known that their company was about more than just selling products. It was about creating value and experiences. But hearing Catherine's thoughts on customer collaboration sparked a new sense of direction. By the time they hung up, Marcus had already started to imagine a new product launch, a collaboration between the company and its most loyal customers. A project that would involve customers in every step, from design to testing to feedback. It would not only drive innovation, but it would also re-engage their team, who would feel like they were part of something bigger than just a corporate project. The next morning, Marcus gathered his leadership team for a brainstorming session. He outlined Catherine's idea to them, and the room was abuzz with energy as everyone began to throw out suggestions. "We could start by reaching out to our most engaged customers," said Sarah. "We could ask them to be part of a beta testing group. They can help us refine the product before it goes to market. Or we could hold an event, something like a design competition," David suggested. "Get the customers involved in the creative process from the ground up. They could submit ideas, vote on designs, and then we take it from there." Linda, who had been quieter than usual, suddenly spoke up. "What if we could offer a personalized experience with the product itself? Like, customers could select features based on their preferences, and we'd build that into the product. A true customization experience." Marcus smiled as the ideas flowed freely. It was exactly what they needed, a fresh perspective that involved their customers in the process. It would not only push them to innovate faster, but it would also build a deeper emotional connection with their audience. "We can make this work," Marcus said, his confidence growing with every passing second. "Let's move forward with this. Let's create a product that's not just about us, but about them. The people who have been with us through thick and thin. We'll design something that truly reflects the spirit of our company." As the team worked through the details, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building inside him. This was the kind of innovation they needed. It wasn't about outpacing the competition. It was about offering something that resonated with their customers on a personal level. And in doing so, they could redefine what it meant to be a brand in this fast-changing world. The collaboration project was launched a month later with overwhelming success. Customers from all over the country flooded the company's website to participate in design polls, idea submissions, and beta testing. The excitement was palpable, and Marcus could feel the energy shift throughout the company. Employees were re-engaged, motivated by the idea that they were creating something special with the very people they served. What started as a company on the brink of falling behind had, in the span of a few months, transformed into an example of what true innovation could look like, one that was grounded in community, trust, and collaboration. And it all started with an unexpected ally. With the customer collaboration project moving forward and the initial feedback pouring in, Marcus began to feel the first real sense of victory since taking over the company. Employees were buzzing with renewed energy, and customers were more engaged than ever. It felt like the company had turned a corner. People weren't just working for the business, they were working for the shared goal of creating something meaningful. However, despite the progress, Marcus knew the most challenging part of the process was still to come. The question of trust, both internally and externally, would continue to define the company's future. The pressure was mounting from multiple directions. Internally, the employees who had been resistant to change still had doubts. The larger vision was clear, but the daily grind of implementation and the fear of failure still loomed over the team. Externally, the market was watching, waiting for this new approach to either prove itself or fall flat. But perhaps the most pressing issue of all was the question of trust within his leadership team. They had all been through so much in the past months, and while things had gotten better, Marcus knew they still had some bridges to rebuild. In particular, there were lingering concerns among certain team members who had yet to fully embrace the changes Marcus had made. It was during one of these quiet moments of reflection, a week after the official launch of the collaboration project, that Marcus received an unexpected message. It was from Ryan, the head of operations, and a man who had been with the company for over 15 years. Marcus had always respected Ryan's experience and loyalty, but he had also noticed a certain tension between Ryan and the rest of the team in recent weeks. Ryan had been quiet during the meetings, and while he hadn't overtly opposed the changes, there was a sense of hesitation in his demeanor. This message, however, would change everything. "Marcus," the email began, "I'd like to meet with you in person. There are some concerns I need to discuss, and I think it's important we address them face to face." The email was brief and to the point. It didn't take long for Marcus to feel a knot of unease in his stomach. Ryan was a no-nonsense kind of guy, and if he was reaching out like this, it likely meant something serious. Marcus quickly typed a response, agreeing to meet the next morning at the flagship store. His mind raced as he wondered what the conversation might hold. Ryan had been a rock for the company, a man who had seen it all. If there was a problem, it wasn't going to be an easy fix. The next morning, Marcus met Ryan in the store's quiet office space. The store was closed for the day, and the space felt unusually still. Ryan sat in front of Marcus, his hands folded on the table, his face unreadable. "Thanks for meeting with me," Ryan began, his voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about what's been happening here, and I need to say some things, Marcus." Marcus nodded, taking a seat across from him. "Of course, Ryan. I know things haven't been easy, and I appreciate everything you've done for the company. Whatever's on your mind, we need to talk about it." Ryan hesitated for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at Marcus. "You've made a lot of changes. I see the direction you're trying to take us in, and I understand why. But there's a problem, Marcus." Marcus leaned forward. "What's the problem?" Ryan exhaled slowly. "You're pushing too hard, too fast. I get it. We need to evolve, but you're expecting the team to go from 0 to 100 in the blink of an eye. People are burned out. The morale is better, yes, but the pressure is still there, and I'm not sure we're ready for all of this yet." Marcus felt a pang in his chest. He had suspected some of his team members were feeling overwhelmed, but hearing it directly from Ryan hit harder than he expected. "I didn't realize it was that bad," Marcus admitted, trying to keep his tone steady. "I've been pushing because I believe we're running out of time. The market's moving fast, and I don't want us to fall behind." Ryan nodded, his gaze softening. "I understand the urgency. We all do. But it's not just about the market. It's about the people who are running the business. If we break them down, the company won't survive. We need to pace ourselves. We need to make sure we're not sacrificing the people for the process." Marcus swallowed hard. The weight of Ryan's words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on the big picture, on getting results quickly, that he had failed to see how the pace of change was affecting his team. "I hear you, Ryan," Marcus said quietly. "I've been so focused on fixing everything that I haven't taken enough time to check in with the team. I've been pushing them too hard, and I'm sorry for that." Ryan looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I'm not saying we stop. We can't stop. But we need a strategy that takes the team's well-being into account. We need to make sure that the pace of change matches their ability to adapt. If we don't, all this work will have been for nothing. Marcus sat back, digesting Ryan's words. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for Ryan's honesty. The reality of leading a company through transformation was far more complicated than he had initially realized. The pressure to innovate, to stay ahead of competitors, had clouded his judgment in ways he hadn't fully understood. "Thanks for being honest with me," Marcus said, his voice sincere. "I needed to hear that." In the days that followed, Marcus took Ryan's words to heart. He called for smaller, more frequent check-ins with the leadership team and the staff to gauge their concerns and monitor the pace of change. He also made it clear that while the company would continue to push forward, they would do so in a way that prioritized employee well-being. The results were immediate. Employees began to feel like they had a voice in the process, and their concerns were being addressed in real time. The tension that had been brewing in the air slowly began to dissipate, and morale began to improve once again. But perhaps the most important lesson Marcus learned in that conversation was the importance of trust, both in his leadership and in the people who made the company what it was. In that moment, Ryan had given him a gift, the truth. And Marcus knew that it was a gift he couldn't afford to ignore. The changes Marcus had initiated were beginning to bear fruit. But even as the company's internal culture began to shift, external pressures mounted. The competition was relentless, and the media, always eager for a story, continued to write about the comeback kid and his ability to turn a floundering company into an innovative powerhouse. But with success came even greater expectations. The external world wasn't ready to let up. The pressure to perform, to show tangible results, was suffocating. Marcus had been fielding calls from potential investors, eager to see if the collaboration project was as successful as he promised. The pressure to show them a return on their investment weighed heavily on his shoulders. He spent sleepless nights drafting plans, calculating numbers, and revising presentations. The work never seemed to end. The phone calls were constant, the emails endless. Marcus knew he couldn't keep up this pace for long. He had to deliver. There was no room for failure. It was during one of these grueling nights, as he stared at his computer screen, that the realization hit him. He was losing sight of the bigger picture. All the strategic shifts, all the changes, had been made with the idea that the company could transform and grow, but in the pursuit of innovation, he had overlooked the importance of patience and trust, not just with his team but with himself. And it wasn't just his mind that was exhausted. His body was starting to show signs of wear. He had been so consumed with the company's revival that he had neglected his own health. The long hours, the stress, and the constant strain were beginning to take a toll. He was burnt out. One morning, after another sleepless night, Marcus was on the verge of making yet another presentation to investors. His suit felt too tight, his eyes heavy, and his mind sluggish. He was walking down the hall when Sarah, his chief marketing officer, stopped him with a concerned expression on her face. "Marcus, you've been pushing yourself too hard," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. "You haven't been yourself lately." Marcus gave a weak smile, trying to brush off the concern. "It's nothing. Just a lot of work, you know?" Sarah didn't buy it. She stepped closer, her voice soft but insistent. "Marcus, listen. You're doing incredible things here, but you can't keep running yourself into the ground. We need you to be at your best, and right now, you're not. We can handle this, but you need to take a step back." He opened his mouth to protest, but stopped himself. Sarah was right. He had been so consumed by the idea of turning the company around that he had forgotten the most important thing, his own well-being, and he needed to be at his best to lead them through this storm. For the first time in a long while, Marcus allowed himself to listen to someone else. "You're right, Sarah," he said quietly, rubbing his eyes. "Maybe I've been too focused on the result. Maybe I need to take a breather." Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "We've got this. You don't have to do it all alone. We're a team, and we're in this together. But you've got to take care of yourself too." That afternoon, Marcus made the decision to take a day off. He canceled his investor meeting and instead spent time with his family. He went for a walk in the park with his wife, Anna, and their kids. It was something he hadn't done in weeks, simply being present, without worrying about the next big deal or the next project. It was a chance to recharge, to reconnect with the reasons why he had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't easy. His mind raced with thoughts of deadlines, competitors, and the looming expectations of the industry. But with each passing hour, he felt a little lighter. He started to remember the small joys, his children's laughter, the way Anna's hand felt in his. These simple moments helped him find a new sense of clarity. The next day, Marcus returned to work, but he was different. He had recalibrated, and he now understood the true importance of pacing. The company was in a race to stay relevant, but Marcus knew that without a healthy balance between ambition and self-care, the company, just like himself, would burn out. He called a meeting with his leadership team and presented a new idea, one that was more balanced and sustainable. We need to slow down a little. We've been pushing at full speed, but now it's time to steady our pace, recheck our processes, and ensure that we're not just innovating for the sake of innovation. We need to make sure we're building something that will last, something that doesn't sacrifice our people or our integrity. The leadership team agreed, relieved that Marcus was acknowledging the strain they'd all been under. They began working together on a revised strategy, one that would allow for continued growth but also give the team the space to thrive. In the weeks that followed, Marcus found a new rhythm. The company continued to work toward its goals, but the focus shifted slightly. The pressure was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. Marcus found himself leaning more on his team, empowering them to make decisions and take ownership of their respective departments. And as a result, the entire team felt more engaged and motivated. The collaboration project was still thriving, with customer involvement growing every day. But now, Marcus was more mindful of how he was leading the team. He had learned that innovation didn't just mean pushing harder. It meant trusting the process, trusting his people, and giving them the time and space they needed to succeed. As the months went by, the company not only survived but thrived. The external pressure from competitors and the market didn't disappear, but Marcus had learned how to handle it without letting it overtake his vision. And most importantly, he had learned how to trust the people who were with him on this journey. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Marcus now felt ready to face whatever came next. With a strong, cohesive team behind him and a renewed sense of purpose, he knew that they could handle anything, together. The weeks following the shift in strategy brought not only a change in pace but also a marked change in the company's overall atmosphere. The leadership team, now united and focused, worked collaboratively toward achieving the goals that Marcus had set, goals that, for the first time in a long while, felt achievable without sacrificing their health, their relationships, or their integrity. The collaboration project, with its customer-driven design and beta testing, was proving to be more successful than anyone had anticipated. The excitement from the customer base had been infectious, and feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. It was clear that people wanted to be part of something real, something meaningful. They didn't just want products. They wanted to feel connected to the companies they supported. For Marcus, the biggest lesson had been about trust. Trust in his team, trust in the process, and trust in himself. He had learned that the fastest route to success wasn't always the straightest, and that taking the time to nurture relationships and invest in people was just as important as meeting deadlines or achieving profits. But as things started to settle into a new rhythm, an unexpected challenge arose. It began with a series of unremarkable phone calls from James, their chief financial officer. James had been quiet during the recent changes, focusing on the numbers, but Marcus could tell something was off. When James asked to meet in person, Marcus immediately sensed that this conversation would be different. That afternoon, they met in Marcus's office. James sat down, a folder in his hands, but his face was serious, more serious than Marcus had ever seen him. He handed over a set of financial reports, and Marcus began scanning the documents. His heart sank as he read through the numbers. "This isn't right," Marcus muttered under his breath. The projections they had worked so hard on were off. The forecast was showing unexpected losses that didn't line up with their current trajectory. They had been expecting growth, but instead, their margins were shrinking. James shifted in his seat, his voice careful. "Marcus, I've been keeping an eye on this for a while. We've been doing great in terms of innovation and customer engagement, but we've got a serious cash flow problem. There are areas we've overinvested in, and unless we adjust quickly, we're going to run into trouble." Marcus exhaled sharply, his mind racing. This wasn't the news he had expected. He had just started to feel like they were turning a corner, and now, the rug had been pulled out from under him. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the financial statements in front of him, trying to process the numbers. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. James hesitated before answering. "If we don't make adjustments in the next few months, we could be facing a liquidity crisis. We need to trim costs and reassess some of our investments, especially in the expansion plans. We've been too aggressive in certain areas, and now it's catching up with us." Marcus felt a wave of frustration. They had worked so hard to rebuild, and just when things were looking up, this. But he knew he couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. This was a challenge, but it was one he could face head-on. "All right," Marcus said, his tone firm. "Let's do what we need to do. We'll cut back on non-essential spending and focus on what's truly driving value. I don't want to lose sight of our people and the innovation we've built, but we need to get these numbers back in line." James nodded. "I'll start pulling together a more detailed plan for cuts and adjustments, but we need to move quickly if we're going to stay ahead of this." For the next several weeks, Marcus, James, and the leadership team worked tirelessly to reassess their finances and adjust their strategy. They made tough decisions, trimming down on projects that weren't yielding immediate returns and scaling back on some of their expansion plans. They refocused on their core strengths, the customer collaboration initiative, their unique brand identity, and a more targeted approach to innovation. It wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations, hard choices to be made, and moments where Marcus doubted his ability to turn things around. But each time he felt discouraged, he reminded himself of the journey they had been on. They had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges before, and they had come out stronger on the other side. They could do it again. As they worked through the financial restructuring, Marcus made a point of staying transparent with his team. He gathered everyone in a company-wide meeting to address the situation head-on. The last thing he wanted was for employees to feel the same uncertainty that had gripped him in the early days of the transformation. "We've had some setbacks, and we're making the necessary adjustments," Marcus told them, standing in front of the room. "But we're not backing down. The work you've all done to make this company a place where people can create, innovate, and collaborate, it matters. And we're not going to lose sight of that. We are going to move forward with strength, and we're going to do it together." The team listened intently. Marcus could see that they were nervous, but also resolute. They had come too far to let this setback break their spirits. And as he looked around the room, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: a renewed sense of purpose. Within the next few months, the company adjusted its trajectory. They weathered the financial storm, and while they hadn't reached the heights they had once dreamed of, they were on solid ground once more. The customer collaboration project continued to thrive, bringing in new revenue streams and increasing customer loyalty. The team was stronger, more united, and more focused than ever before. But Marcus knew that the most important thing he had learned from this experience wasn't just about the numbers. It was about resilience, the ability to adapt and grow, even when the world seemed stacked against you. And with that resilience came a new vision for the future. They hadn't just survived the crisis. They had emerged from it smarter, more strategic, and more connected to their customers and their mission than ever before. The months following the financial restructuring were filled with careful planning and strategic execution. The company's future, once uncertain, was now firmly in their hands. But Marcus knew they weren't out of the woods just yet. Resilience wasn't just about surviving a crisis. It was about learning from it, growing stronger, and staying adaptable as the world around them shifted. One of the key lessons Marcus had learned was the importance of maintaining a long-term vision while being able to pivot when necessary. The customer collaboration project continued to be a massive success, but the real story was in the way the company had managed to rally together and push forward after facing an immense challenge. However, there was another mountain to climb. As the company's reputation grew and investors began showing renewed interest, there came a deeper level of scrutiny. The pressure to maintain growth, to keep innovating, and to sustain the momentum was more intense than ever. It was during one of these high-pressure weeks that Marcus received a surprising call from Dylan, the CEO of a large tech company that had recently made waves with its own growth and innovation. Dylan had heard about Marcus' success in turning the company around and was interested in having a conversation about potential partnerships. When Marcus agreed to meet, he didn't know what to expect. Was Dylan looking to buy them out? Or was he just testing the waters for a strategic alliance? The possibilities were both exciting and nerve-wracking. The meeting took place at an upscale downtown hotel, and Dylan greeted Marcus with a firm handshake and a confident smile. "Marcus, I've heard a lot about you," Dylan began, settling into his seat. "You've done something truly impressive with your company. Not many leaders have the courage to make the changes you've made. You've turned a tough situation into something that's now setting the standard for innovation in the industry." Marcus, though flattered, remained cautious. "Thank you, Dylan. It's been a team effort, and we've had our share of challenges along the way, but I'm proud of where we're headed." Dylan leaned forward, his eyes glinting with interest. "That's exactly why I wanted to meet. I think there's a lot we can do together. We've been watching your company closely, and we see potential for a partnership that could take us both to the next level." Marcus wasn't entirely surprised. There had been whispers about potential mergers and acquisitions in the industry, but this felt different. Dylan wasn't talking about a buyout. He was talking about a partnership, about combining forces for mutual growth. "Tell me more," Marcus said, his curiosity piqued. Dylan explained that his company had been focusing heavily on expanding its reach and innovation in certain markets, but they lacked the customer engagement and the deep connection with their client base that Marcus' company had built. By partnering, they could merge their resources, combine their strengths, and create a product that would be far more impactful than anything they could do alone. It was a compelling pitch, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a sense of excitement stirring within him. But at the same time, he knew this was a huge decision. It could propel the company to new heights, or it could change everything they had worked so hard to build. After several more rounds of discussions, Marcus brought the proposal to his leadership team. He knew that this decision wasn't his alone to make. Every member of the team needed to weigh in on whether this partnership was the right move for them and their employees. The team gathered in the conference room, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Marcus began by laying out the details of the potential partnership and what it could mean for the future of the company. "This could be the opportunity that takes us to the next level," Marcus said. "But it's also a huge risk. We'd be giving up some of our autonomy, and there are no guarantees. What do you all think?" There was a long silence as the team absorbed the information. Finally, Ryan spoke up. "I think this could be a game-changer for us," Ryan said. "But we have to be careful. We've built something special here, and we can't lose sight of what makes us unique. We have to ensure that our voice, our vision, remains at the forefront of anything we do going forward." Sarah, the marketing officer, added, "I agree. We've developed strong customer relationships and a brand that stands for something. If we lose that connection or compromise our values for the sake of growth, it could backfire. But if we can align with Dylan's company in a way that allows us to keep our core intact, this could open up incredible opportunities." James, the CFO, chimed in with his concerns. "I'm cautiously optimistic. The financial side of this is compelling. We could get access to resources that would be difficult to acquire on our own. But we have to be careful about how much control we give up. We can't afford to let our growth be driven by someone else's priorities." The room was filled with thoughtful nods and murmurs of agreement. It was clear that the leadership team was divided. There were opportunities here, but there were risks as well. Marcus understood that this was a decision that would change the trajectory of their company forever, and he needed to be certain. The decision was made over the course of several weeks. Marcus and his leadership team met with Dylan's company multiple times to discuss terms, negotiate, and ensure that their values were aligned. Finally, after a series of revisions to the agreement, they reached a deal that worked for both sides. The partnership wasn't a complete merger. It was a strategic alliance, allowing both companies to retain their independence while sharing resources, technologies, and expertise. It was a balance that allowed Marcus to keep his vision intact while taking advantage of the opportunity for accelerated growth. As the ink dried on the contract, Marcus felt a sense of relief mixed with excitement. It wasn't the easy route, but it was the right one. This partnership would help them scale faster, reach new markets, and continue innovating without compromising the principles they had worked so hard to build. The news of the strategic partnership spread quickly throughout the company. While there was initial excitement, there was also an undercurrent of nervousness. A partnership with a large tech giant, while full of promise, meant that their small but fiercely independent company would be linked with a much larger corporate machine. It was a step into unknown territory, and no one could predict how things would unfold. Marcus called an all-hands meeting to address the employees directly. He knew it was crucial to ease any concerns and assure everyone that the company's core values would remain unchanged. The leadership team had worked tirelessly to ensure that this partnership would be a mutual collaboration, not an acquisition. They weren't giving up their identity. They were simply taking the next step towards something bigger. Standing in front of the room, Marcus felt the weight of the moment. He had been through so much with these people. Sacrifices, setbacks, triumphs. They had been through it all together, and now, they stood on the precipice of something new. "I know there's been a lot of talk about this partnership," Marcus began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I want to take a moment to explain what this means for all of us. We are not selling out. We're not losing control of what we've built. We are simply finding new ways to scale faster, to reach more people, and to build on the foundation we've already laid." He paused, letting the words sink in. This company was built on innovation, collaboration, and authenticity, and that will never change. We've built something that people believe in, and we're going to keep growing that. This partnership is a chance to supercharge what we've already started, to keep pushing boundaries while staying true to who we are. The room fell silent as the employees absorbed the message. Marcus could see the skepticism in some eyes, but he also saw the glimmer of hope in others. It was a pivotal moment, and the next steps would determine how successful the collaboration could be. In the weeks that followed, the leadership team worked closely with Dylan's company to integrate their resources. It wasn't without its challenges. There were numerous meetings, cross-departmental collaborations, and a multitude of logistical hurdles to overcome. But slowly, the benefits of the partnership started to take shape. Access to new technologies and increased funding allowed them to fast-track their R&D efforts. Their marketing reach expanded almost overnight, and the collaboration between the two teams sparked fresh ideas and creative breakthroughs. But as the work progressed, Marcus noticed something surprising. While the collaboration was productive, there was a distinct difference in the corporate cultures. His company, which had grown from a small team with a shared mission, valued open communication, flexibility, and empowerment. Dylan's company, on the other hand, was more structured, with processes that prioritized efficiency and predictability. The clash of these cultures created friction at times, especially in meetings when one side pushed for quick, decisive action and the other for more thoughtful deliberation. One particular instance stood out. Marcus had spent weeks working on a new product idea, a cutting-edge software platform that combined their customer collaboration initiative with advanced data analytics. The project had the potential to revolutionize their industry, but there was a significant roadblock. The two teams couldn't agree on the development timeline. Dylan's team wanted to move fast, launch the product quickly, and capture the market before competitors could react. Marcus and his team, however, wanted to take more time to refine the concept and ensure it met the high standards they had set for themselves. That evening, Marcus walked through the office, taking a moment to reflect on what was at stake. The collaboration could lead to great things, but only if they could find common ground. He knew that the key to making this partnership work would be balancing the strengths of both teams, the agility and creativity of his company, and the structure and resources of Dylan's company. He called a meeting with Sarah, James, and Ryan the next morning. They needed to come up with a plan to bridge the gap. "I think it's time we go back to our roots," Marcus said as they sat down around the table. "We've always prided ourselves on having an open, transparent approach to problem solving. We need to find a way to communicate more effectively with Dylan's team and make sure they understand where we're coming from. We don't want to compromise our values, but we also can't ignore the realities of scaling up." Ryan, always the voice of reason, spoke up. "Maybe we need to think about how we can adapt our processes without losing what makes us unique. We can't afford to just roll over, but we also can't keep butting heads. There has to be a way to meet in the middle." After brainstorming for a few hours, they came up with a solution. They would propose a phased approach to the product launch. The first phase would focus on a smaller, more refined release, which would allow them to test the waters and gather real-time feedback. The second phase would build on this, incorporating more features and improvements based on customer input. This way, they could move quickly while still ensuring the product was of the highest quality. Marcus scheduled a meeting with Dylan and his team the next day to present the proposal. He knew it was a risk. They were asking for patience in a partnership that was built on speed and efficiency, but he believed it was the only way to ensure long-term success. As they sat around the conference table, Marcus laid out the plan. He spoke calmly but with conviction, explaining how the phased approach would allow them to gather valuable insights from customers and adapt the product based on real-world usage. Dylan listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Marcus finished, there was a long silence. Dylan leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping on the table. "This is a bit slower than I would have liked," Dylan said, his tone measured. "But I get where you're coming from. You've got a point. If we rush this, we could miss out on opportunities. I think this approach could work, if we're committed to making it happen." Marcus nodded. "We're committed. We just need to make sure that, as we scale, we don't lose the heart of what we're trying to create." In the end, Dylan agreed to the phased approach, and the teams worked together to refine the product. The collaboration wasn't always easy, but it was effective. The feedback from the first phase was overwhelmingly positive, and by the time they launched the full product, it was a massive success. As Marcus watched the product roll out to customers, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. The company had navigated the tricky waters of a high-stakes partnership, and they had emerged stronger on the other side. They had learned how to balance speed with quality, innovation with practicality, and above all, they had learned how to collaborate. The months following the successful launch of their collaborative project were filled with excitement. The partnership had begun to bear fruit in ways that Marcus had hoped for: stronger market presence, increased revenue, and access to resources that allowed the company to scale faster than ever before. But as with any major shift, there were undercurrents that began to rise to the surface, some unexpected and others difficult to ignore. The company had grown quickly, and so had its internal complexities. The once tight-knit group of innovators and dreamers had expanded into a much larger workforce, bringing with it not only new talents but also new challenges. While the collaboration with Dylan's company had brought immense benefits, it also introduced an element of friction that couldn't be overlooked. Marcus could feel it in the air: the shift in company culture. What had once been a close-knit, collaborative environment was slowly becoming more divided. Employees who had once felt like family now seemed to be drifting apart. Some, especially those who had been with the company from the beginning, felt a growing sense of alienation. The newer employees, many of whom were from Dylan's company or hired in the wake of the partnership, seemed to have different expectations, a different approach to work, and a different way of interacting. It was on a late afternoon, a few weeks after the full product launch, that Marcus began to notice just how deep the tension ran. He had dropped by the office unexpectedly, wanting to check in on the team's progress and perhaps get a feel for the pulse of the company. Walking through the open-plan workspace, he could see the changes were tangible. Some areas had been modernized with new tech, while others, especially the creative spaces, were filled with quiet, focused employees absorbed in their tasks. The hum of productivity felt different, colder somehow. As he passed by the development team's desk area, Marcus overheard a conversation between Emma, a senior designer, and Jared, a newer hire from Dylan's company. Emma was visibly frustrated. Her arms crossed tightly as she spoke. "I just don't understand why everything has to be rushed," Emma said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "We've been here. We've built this company from the ground up, and now it feels like we're just a cog in some corporate machine. We used to be able to take our time, make sure every detail was perfect, and now it's just go, go, go now." Jared, who had only been with the company for a few months, shrugged. "I get it, but if we want to stay competitive, we need to move quickly. Dylan's company doesn't play slow. It's all about scaling fast, capturing market share before anyone else does." Emma shook her head, clearly frustrated. "That's the problem. We're losing ourselves in all of this. I signed up to be part of a company that was about innovation, not just efficiency." Marcus, who had been quietly listening, took a deep breath. He had known that the merger of two different cultures would be challenging, but seeing the strain firsthand hit harder than he had expected. It wasn't just about the company's growth or the product launch anymore. It was about the people who had been the heart of everything they had accomplished. The team that had brought them this far was beginning to fray at the edges. That evening, after everyone had left for the day, Marcus sat alone in his office, staring out at the skyline. The weight of the decision he had made, the partnership with Dylan's company, hung heavily on him. He had known that growth came with sacrifices, but seeing the friction within his own team was a stark reminder of just how delicate balance could be. Was it worth it? The next morning, Marcus called a leadership meeting to discuss the emerging issues. As the team gathered, the atmosphere was different than usual. Everyone seemed tense, cautious, aware that the conversation they were about to have would be difficult. Marcus had already spoken to Sarah and Ryan about what he had observed. They were both deeply concerned, but they understood that the culture shift was something that needed to be addressed head-on. "Listen," Marcus began, his voice steady but filled with concern. "We've come a long way. We've made something amazing here, something that's all about collaboration, creativity, and pushing boundaries. But I'm noticing something that's troubling me. There's a disconnect in the team. People are feeling like they're losing their sense of purpose. We need to talk about this." Sarah, the marketing officer, was the first to speak. "I've been hearing similar things from the teams. There's a definite shift in the energy. The newcomers are great, don't get me wrong, but they bring a different approach to how things get done. They're focused on efficiency, on speed, and on results, but they're not always taking the time to understand our values, our processes." Ryan, who had always been a voice of reason, added, "It's like we're being pulled in two directions. The creative side wants to maintain our ethos, to keep innovating at our own pace. But the corporate side, Dylan's company, their systems, they push for faster, more predictable results. It's creating friction, and I think we're starting to feel the cracks." Marcus nodded, rubbing his temple. "So, what do we do about it? How do we preserve our culture while embracing the growth that's happening?" The room fell silent as everyone mulled over the question. They all knew there was no easy answer. After much discussion, it became clear that something needed to change. The company couldn't continue to ignore the cultural divide. They needed to find a way to bring everyone together, old and new employees alike, and make sure that no one felt left behind or unheard. They had to be intentional about preserving the creative, collaborative spirit that had driven the company's success in the first place. Marcus made the decision to launch a series of internal workshops and team-building activities designed to align the company's vision with its growing structure. He also announced a town hall meeting where employees could speak freely about their concerns and offer suggestions for improvement. He wanted the team to feel like they were part of the solution, not just bystanders to the changes. The first town hall was tense, but incredibly productive. Employees from all levels spoke candidly about the challenges they were facing, the frustrations that had built up, and the desire to recapture the company's original spirit. Marcus listened intently, acknowledging that some of the issues were inevitable given the scale of growth, but assuring everyone that they would not lose sight of the company's core values. "We need to evolve," Marcus told the group, "but we're not abandoning what made us successful. We're finding a way to combine the best of both worlds. We can move quickly, but we can also move thoughtfully. We can scale, but we can also maintain the soul of this company." It wasn't a quick fix. The process of reintegrating the company's culture was slow, but over time, it began to pay off. The leadership team worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the old and new ways of working. They adapted processes to allow for both innovation and efficiency. They created spaces where creative teams could collaborate freely and also developed clear structures for the business side to function smoothly. Gradually, the tension began to ease, and the company started to feel like a cohesive unit again. It wasn't perfect, but they were learning how to balance their ambitious growth with the values they had fought so hard to protect. Marcus had learned a valuable lesson in the process. Growth, while exciting, often comes with unexpected consequences. It was a journey of continuous adaptation, and one that required not just strategic decisions, but a deep commitment to the people who had helped build the foundation. As Marcus leaned back in his chair, he couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey his company had taken. They had grown, adapted, and faced challenges that many startups never overcome. But now, As the company neared the one-year anniversary of their partnership with Dylan's firm, Marcus felt the pressure building once again. There was a critical turning point ahead, one that would test everything they had worked for. The integration between the two companies was mostly stable now, but that didn't mean everything was running smoothly. The partnership had given them access to unparalleled resources, but it also meant that there was now a higher expectation for results. Dylan's company had bigger ambitions, and with the success of the recent product launch, they were now looking at expanding into new markets internationally. This was their biggest venture yet, an expansion into Europe, Asia, and beyond. The stakes couldn't be higher. But while the vision was clear, the path forward was murky. To take their next steps, they needed more than just a good product. They needed a winning strategy. And to create that strategy, they needed to dig deep into their roots and find out what truly made them unique. It was time for the ultimate test. The leadership team gathered in the conference room, their faces lined with exhaustion but determined. Marcus had called this meeting to prepare for the upcoming pitch with potential international investors. It wasn't just about securing funding. It was about proving that their vision was still as strong as ever, despite the growing complexity of their business. "I know this is big," Marcus said, his voice steady but full of gravity. "But we've done big things before. We're at the precipice of something that could change everything for us. I need to hear from all of you. What do we stand for? What is it that makes us different from every other company trying to get in on this market?" Sarah, the marketing officer, spoke first. "We stand for authenticity. It's about doing things the right way, even when no one is watching. Our customers trust us because we haven't sacrificed that authenticity for the sake of speed or profit." Ryan, who had been focused on the operational side of things, added, "We've built a culture that's centered around collaboration and creativity. Our strength has always been our ability to stay agile, to be adaptable without losing sight of who we are." James, the product lead, chimed in, "And we innovate with purpose. Every product we build, every feature we add, is designed with the end user in mind. We don't just follow trends, we set them. We solve real problems, not just create buzz." Marcus nodded, taking in each comment. The passion in the room was palpable, and it reminded him of the early days, the scrappy, startup mentality that had carried them through tough times. But now, as they faced a larger, more competitive market, it was clear that this vision would need to evolve. The world was changing rapidly, and they needed to change with it, without losing their identity. "Right," Marcus said. "Our core values haven't changed, but we're at a point where we need to refine how we communicate those values to the world. We need to demonstrate that our innovation and authenticity can compete on a global scale. It's not just about being fast anymore. It's about being smart, being strategic, and executing flawlessly." As the meeting wrapped up, there was a palpable sense of urgency in the air. They were about to embark on a massive international expansion, but Marcus knew that success would depend on more than just good strategy. It would depend on every single person in the company rallying behind their shared vision. The next few weeks were a blur of intense planning and preparation. Marcus worked closely with his leadership team to craft a presentation that not only showcased their product but also communicated the soul of the company. Their values, their commitment to quality, and their drive to innovate in ways that were both disruptive and responsible. The international investors were tough. They didn't just want a story, they wanted proof. They wanted data, metrics, and a roadmap to show that Marcus's company could sustain its rapid growth while maintaining its core identity. The day of the pitch arrived, and Marcus stood in front of the investors, a nervous energy bubbling beneath his calm exterior. The stakes had never been higher. He had to prove that this wasn't just a one-off success. They were in this for the long haul. As he began the pitch, Marcus felt the familiar sense of purpose that had fueled him from the very beginning. He wasn't just selling a product, he was sharing a vision that encompassed everything his team had worked for and everything they stood for. "We're not just a tech company," Marcus began, his voice steady. "We're a company that believes in the power of people. We believe in building something that lasts. Our product isn't just about the bottom line. It's about making a real difference in people's lives." He went on to explain the company's journey, how they had started small but grown quickly, how they had navigated the complexities of scaling while staying true to their values. He spoke about the partnerships they had forged, the challenges they had overcome, and the opportunities that lay ahead. And as he talked, he saw the investors begin to lean in, to listen more intently. It wasn't just the numbers that impressed them. It was the passion, the drive, the authenticity that Marcus and his team exuded. He knew that this was what set them apart. When he finished, there was a long pause. The investors exchanged glances, and Marcus held his breath. He knew that this moment would determine everything. Finally, one of the investors, a well-dressed woman with a sharp gaze, spoke up. "You've done a great job of demonstrating your potential," she said. "But what's really compelling is your commitment to staying true to your values. That's rare in today's market, especially as you scale. I think you've got what it takes to succeed on a global scale." Marcus exhaled, a weight lifting off his shoulders. It wasn't just the words, it was the feeling that they had connected, that the vision, the values, the heart of the company had made an impact. The next few days were a whirlwind of emails, follow-up meetings, and negotiations. The investors were on board. Not only would they secure the funding they needed to expand internationally, they were going to have the backing of some of the most influential players in the industry. Marcus couldn't help but smile as he sat at his desk that evening, the news sinking in. This was it. This was the next chapter. They had passed the final test, not just with the investors, but with themselves. As the weeks went on, the international expansion took shape. The company continued to grow, and with each new challenge, Marcus and his team proved that they could not only survive but thrive. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers or the international success. It was in the fact that they had stayed true to who they were. They had proven that it was possible to scale without losing sight of their values. And in doing so, they had cemented their place as not just a company, but a movement. It had been 6 months since Marcus and his team had secured the international investment and launched their expansion. Their global presence was steadily growing, and the company was not just surviving, it was thriving. Yet, despite the overwhelming success, Marcus found himself standing at a crossroads. The company had achieved so much, and yet it wasn't the external accolades or market share that had begun to weigh on his mind. It was the internal changes, the evolution of the company's identity, the evolving relationships within the team, and his own role as CEO. He had pushed himself and his team to the limit, striving to balance growth with the heart of the company, but now he found himself questioning what was next. He had always been an entrepreneur, driven by the need to create and disrupt, but there was a quiet realization that he couldn't lead the company in the same way forever. The demands of the business had shifted. What once was a fast-paced, hands-on approach was now morphing into something that required different leadership, more strategic, more visionary. It was one quiet evening in his office, just as the sun dipped below the skyline, when Marcus received an unexpected message. It was from Dylan, his longtime business partner, someone who had been a constant presence through every twist and turn of the journey. The message was simple: "Marcus, it's time we talked. I think it's time we step back and reassess our roles. There's a bigger picture we need to consider, and I think it's time we made a bold move for the future of the company. Let's discuss." Marcus stared at the message for a few moments. He had always valued Dylan's insight, but this felt different. Something about the words felt like a signal. It wasn't just a business strategy, there was something deeper at play. Without hesitation, he set up a meeting for the next day. The following morning, they sat across from each other in the company's conference room. Dylan, as always, was sharp and focused, his tone both calm and assertive. "Marcus," Dylan started, "we've built something incredible here. We've created a brand, a culture, a company that stands for something much bigger than just products. But I think it's time we both start thinking about the next chapter, not just for the company, but for ourselves." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I'm talking about succession," Dylan replied, his eyes meeting Marcus's. "We've led this company through some incredible challenges, but we can't keep carrying this burden alone. As we expand globally, we need leadership that can navigate this new scale. I've been thinking, maybe it's time for us to look for someone who can take the reins." Marcus paused, the weight of Dylan's words sinking in. "You think we need to step aside?" "Not completely," Dylan clarified. "But we need someone who can lead the next phase, someone who can focus on global operations while we continue to drive innovation from the top. It's time for a shift, Marcus. "We've built this from the ground up, but I think we're at a point where the company needs someone with fresh perspective and experience to guide it through the next level." The conversation was one that Marcus had never anticipated, though in hindsight, it made sense. The company had grown far beyond the small startup they had once dreamed of. The challenges now were not just about maintaining the culture or pushing out great products. They were about navigating complex international markets, managing larger teams, and making decisions that would impact thousands of people. He had built this company to scale, but now, the scale was something they had to adapt to. "I've been feeling the same way," Marcus admitted after a long pause. "There's a part of me that's afraid of losing control, afraid of what comes next. But maybe it's time. Maybe I've taken this company as far as I can. I don't know if I can continue to lead it the way it needs to be led now." Dylan nodded. "Exactly. We've always been honest with each other, and I think we're both ready for this change. We've got an incredible team in place. They're capable of carrying this forward, but we need to make sure we find the right person to lead the company in a new direction." The next few weeks were filled with deep reflection for Marcus. He spoke with key members of the leadership team, confiding in them about his conversation with Dylan and what it meant for the future. They were all understanding, though many had mixed feelings. For some, the idea of Marcus stepping back felt like the end of an era. For others, it was a necessary next step for the company to continue growing without losing sight of its core values. Through the process, Marcus realized that stepping back didn't mean abandoning his vision. It meant allowing the company to evolve while still remaining a guiding force behind the scenes. He began to embrace the idea of mentoring a new CEO, someone who could lead the company into its next chapter while maintaining the innovative spirit they had worked so hard to cultivate. A few months later, Marcus and Dylan announced their decision to bring in a new CEO. A seasoned executive with experience managing global companies and navigating complex international markets. Her name was Lena Carter, and she had an impressive track record of scaling businesses while maintaining their culture. Marcus and Dylan knew that she was the right choice, and they were confident that she would be able to take the company to new heights. The transition was emotional but seamless. Marcus remained involved in the company, focusing on high-level strategy and innovation, while Lena took the lead on operations and global expansion. As they worked together, Marcus found a new sense of peace, knowing that the company was in capable hands. Months turned into years, and the company flourished under Lena's leadership. The brand continued to grow, breaking into new markets and setting new industry standards. But through it all, Marcus remained a guiding force, his vision and commitment to the company still evident in everything they did. He had learned that leadership wasn't about being in control at all times. Sometimes, true leadership meant knowing when to step back and empower others to carry the torch forward. One evening, Marcus stood at the window of his office, looking out at the city skyline. The world had changed so much since those early days. They had come so far, and yet, it felt like they were just getting started. As he thought about the journey, the ups and downs, the wins and losses, he smiled. This was exactly where he was meant to be. He had built something that would endure, something that would continue to make an impact for years to come. And as he looked to the future, Marcus knew one thing for certain. The next chapter was already beginning.